General Assembly, and we are thrilled to welcome you today as we launch Build and Blaze TV live at the United Nations General Assembly. Welcome from all around the world, and a special, special welcome to our watch parties in the US, in Mexico, in Kosovo, in Lebanon, and beyond. My name is Radia Funna, and today on the show we are very excited to welcome Ambassador Andrés Roemer and Ambassador Teuta Sahatqija. This morning I will have a conversation with the ambassador to the nation of Kosovo, and we will talk a little bit about the difficult choices that Kosovo made to get back online after the devastation of a war. And then this afternoon, Ambassador Roemer and I will pick up on that discussion, and we'll talk a little bit about the future, about critical thinking, about ideas. Ambassador Roemer is the ambassador for the free flow of knowledge, which I think is a very exciting title. And when we talk about the greatest challenges facing the world today as framed by the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, we will dig into what that means for the theory of the exponential human. But first, before I get too far into that, let's talk a little bit about me, about us at Build and Blaze, about why we are here. I am a theorist, and I am the founder of Build and Blaze. And I started the organization in 2012 because I had a distinct interest in the coevolution of human and machine. It was very interesting to me coming from the world of corporate America. What I thought was disruption. And I wanted to see how that disruption was impacting business, particularly in the fourth industrial revolution. But what I realized, which was really, really interesting, is that the disruption was not a disruption at all. It was an evolution. That the fourth industrial revolution was not a revolution of organizations as the first three, but rather it was a revolution of humans, a human revolution, in fact, a co-evolution with machine. I've spent the last 7 or so years since I started Build and Blaze in 2012 studying and learning and researching about how humans and machines are co-evolving and what that means for the future. The output of that was the exponential theory, which I launched in 2017, a couple of years ago, at La Ciudad de las Ideas in Mexico. And today we will dig more into that. But what I want to do first and foremost this morning is I am thrilled beyond belief to welcome one of the most amazing people I know. Ambassador Teuta. She is a public figure who, until her appointment as Ambassador and Consul General of Kosovo in New York, was a member of Parliament, representing the Democratic League of Kosovo. She served as the chair of the Parliamentary Committee on European Integration, and during her 6 years in Parliament, she served as the vice chair of the Parliamentary Caucus and first vice chair of Parliamentary Committee on Economic Development. Ambassador Sahatqija, welcome. So we have been having a fun time this morning. We've been enjoying some technical difficulties. And we're hoping that at some point we can bring in our Mexico feed. But in the meantime, I am honored that you would spend some time of your morning with us today. I'm honored to know you. I think you are the most inspiring person I have ever met. Your wonderful personal journey, not just your public figure journey and what you have done for women and what you have done in the space of technology in Kosovo, but your personal journey as a refugee. I mean, thinking about how you make that move, and I know it's not one move, it's probably a huge journey that you could spend much longer than we have today talking about, but from a refugee in a devastated nation to this wonderful ambassador that I'm talking with today, and I'm just so inspired and excited to speak with you. So again, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Radia. It's my honor to be today here with you, as always. And I have to say that you are inspiring person to me also.
Wow,
inspiring
thank you.
person who, through you can see the future. You don't talk about today. You talk about tomorrow. You talk about planting the seed of tomorrow today. And that's why I am honored to be here today with
Thank you.
and to share our thoughts.
Well, thank you for that. So, Ambassador, I have the most interesting topic, and I just want to chat with you about this. I'm releasing a paper, as you know, on the coevolution of human and machine, on what I'm calling the origin story. I'm a Batman fan, so I'm all about origin stories. And how did we get here? When did we start co-evolving with machines? And in my paper, I trace this journey from factories coming online. So I like words as well. So I start out with the definition of online. And when did that word show up? When did we start calling things online? And initially, I thought it was the internet, right? But research taught me that, Google taught me, that factories came online first, right? We were saying the word online to say a factory is ready for operation. And then we transitioned when computers started getting networked to talking about several machines that can talk to each other. And to me, that felt like the journey of machines coming online, which I have coined X machine. And then we transitioned to this moment when the internet becomes public and we humans are now online and we are networked somehow in this, what I call a global hive, connected to one another. I mean, as soon as we wake up in the morning, I know I reach over and I plug in immediately. It's like time to get myself online.
Yes.
And probably the only time I'm probably not online is when I'm asleep. And for me, this is what I've coined the xHuman. So let's talk about your journey in Kosovo.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you for informing what online really means, because nobody is today thinking what that means. But thank you. That was interesting to know that when the lines of the factory came on, that was the first forging of the first name online. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah. But the online of factories that time and today's online are really totally different things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that humans started to use machines probably when they invented a wheel and started to use something beyond their
That's absolutely right.
their forces, their capabilities. From that time, things went very slowly until it became exponential.
Absolutely.
So the speed of difference, the speed of development today is really exponential.
Mm-hmm.
So where is Kosovo in all this? I was a student of electronics a long time ago in the last century.
In the last century?
And it was very exciting to go to university and to play with IBM 1160 if I'm not
She knows the number.
and make the programs with these punched cards.
Right.
And the complete memory of that big computer was 16K, and 16K meant very big memory.
Right.
Then I, through my university time, I know when Spectrum and Commodore came, and it was revolutionary to plug it to the cassette.
Oh, that's right.
And to the television, and hearing that beep 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 beep, beep playing some very simple games. After that, I started to work in a big company of 2,500 people, where accounting was done in machines. In automatic machines, where the accountants took the card, put it in a machine and write it. And when I went there as a young student full of energy, I said, hey, come on, the PCs are invented.
Right.
So
it's time for a PC.
It's time to have PC, and I didn't need a long time to convince our directors and to bring two Olivetti M24.
Wow.
And I remember the first time when I saved the program in a diskette, 525 inches.
Oh my gosh.
Like this. It was such emotion.
Yes.
So what am I doing? What's happening? And I have to remind that was not Windows, was not known at the time. It was DOS with line, directors and others, but it was really exciting. But immediately after that, myself and one of my colleagues, engineers, young engineers, we said, you know what, we will write the programs for salaries, for accounting in that computers, in these two computers. And we were staying from morning up to very late evening writing in GV Basic.
Oh, wow.
Where you had to program every move. When you touch the arrow down to completely work on how the screen will be and others. And I'm very proud to say that after that, with those programs, until the privatization, these programs were working in Printex Prizren, in the textile factory that I was
That's amazing.
Working. After that, I moved to another, I was married, and I moved to another place, to Jakova, again with a lot of energy. So we built the first computer center with a double place with special places for line printers and with dummy terminals and modem, Rakal Milgo modem from Israel we bought, connected to other town. That was really something.
Yes.
Something that we did.
Yeah, it was new technology as well.
The birth of
yes.
a new technology.
Absolutely.
The birth of IT in Kosovo,
yes.
but still very, very far away. So what was next in Kosovo? So through my journey, I think that I'm talking also about Kosovo. That happened also in other places where
right.
PCs were introduced,
yes.
where young, ambitious engineers started to write programs and to integrate the data, the information
yes.
in our everyday life,
right.
and to start to make inevitable connection of machines and people.
Right.
After that, what? Internet, first internet with telephone.
That
there
moment.
Were no internet providers in Kosovo, so for internet we needed to be connected through Belgrade with a
Was
telephone.
it some kind of dial-up to Belgrade?
Dial-up, yes, through dial-up. And to see, I started to give courses about internet.
That's right.
First with workers of our factory in Jakova, and then continued. At that time, the war started in Kosovo, and computers and software and programming was not very high in a
priorities.
List of priorities.
Absolutely.
For us. It was a time of surviving,
yes.
of being alive, of having what to eat.
Yes.
Many people were fired out of jobs. The schools in secondary school and university were closed for Albanian language. So it was really apartheid time, very, very difficult time for us. After the war, the country ended up with 14,000 killed, around 20,000 sexually abused, 800,000 thrown out of house and through mountains sent away.
And specifically, what subset of people did that impact the most?
It was the war against Albanians population in Kosovo. There are 90% of population. And
how many people is that?
Kosovo has 1,800,000 people, and 800,000, including myself, we were just expelled out and thrown. My way was through the river and mountains to Albania with 4 little children, from 4 years to 10 years.
Wow.
That time it seemed the most difficult thing, to leave everything behind and from a person to become a number,
Right.
to become someone who only thinks about, do I have something to eat today, and whether I will be killed during the way, or whether I will see something terrible to my family. Thanks to US, thanks to progressive world, Kosovo was liberated. Thanks to our people and our army who resistance, we were liberated in 1999.
Wow.
And we started to live free. 90% of refugees immediately, for 1 week, they returned home. We didn't wait anybody to take us or to organize something, but we just jumped to the first car we found and returned home. Returned home and found almost everything burned, devastated. But there was a hope. There was a hope. In eyes of a people, there was really a hope.
Why do you think that was? Why was there hope?
That was a hope that we are finally free, that we can breathe, we can survive, we can develop. And that hope and that energy is still very vivid in Kosovo. So I think that when we are talking about internet, about Kosovo Online, about things, I think that we have to mention some developments immediately after the war. The whole world stepped up to help. Houses were burned and devastated, and help started to come.
Right.
The first help was the tents to cover these unexisting roofs.
Right.
And the food. But I think the most important and most valuable help was to bring very big internet dish. IRC, Iretsa, brought that very big internet dish, and I had a possibility to listen, to speak to people who decided that. There was a decision whether to bring more tents or to bring internet.
So tell us a little about that decision.
That brought the internet. Another decision was, I don't know who made that decision, is to start it with courses for internet and for using of computer. There were hundreds of courses all over Kosovo. I know myself in Jakova, I had up to 5 courses per day, working from little children up to pensioners, to ex-workers. And I remember when I was teaching them how to use computer, how to use mouse, there were people who were taking the mouse like a remote control, saying, this is not working, no, this has something wrong with this. So for 20 years, from a country who was totally burned, from a country where people thought about mouse that it's remote control, and having very little knowledge about internet, about using Word and Excel and Access, became the country with the biggest number of engineers in the world. Per capita, Kosovo has the biggest number of engineers who are certified in Cisco, in Juniper, in networking. And
that's amazing.
I think that butterfly effect that started
I was just going to ask, yes.
One big internet dish,
one choice,
broadband, connecting with smaller internet cafes all over. I have to remind that after the war, Kosovo didn't have telephone network. The telephone towers were all down, and we didn't have any way to communicate with each other. So these internet small dishes everywhere and the big dish in Pristina, in fact, speeded up until the towers were online and started to work. So yeah, I think that smart decisions made in a right time.
Right.
As maybe that time it seems like a butterfly effect, like what effect will give this? In fact, gave such a strong effect.
That's amazing.
Today in Kosovo, there are a lot of companies who are from soil of Kosovo working for software development in US. There are internet, these call centers that are completely covering German-speaking countries and a lot from English-speaking countries. It's blockchain in health. It's e-commerce. It's gaming industry.
Wow.
Is really establishing very, very strongly in Kosovo. So I would like to use opportunity also to tell that in Kosovo, half of population is under 30.
That's a young population.
It's a very young population.
Yes.
It's a population who speak 3, 4, 5, 6 languages.
That's
is
impressive.
Not something. I speak only 6.
Only
and,
6.
And there are a lot who speak 6 or 4 languages. English is widely spoken everywhere.
That's
German
amazing.
is very widely spoken. Internet is the internet penetration is the best, not in region. It's in complete European Union. It's
Wow.
88, almost 90% of all territories and families are connected to internet.
That is amazing.
Yes.
And for a
So-
country that was so devastated, you didn't even have phone lines. You didn't even have the ability to
No.
connect at all.
No.
To be more online, in essence, more online
right.
than a lot of countries
That's right.
is an amazing story. And in 20 years, you say, right?
In 20 years, 99 was June 99 when we were liberated and found ourselves in a middle of devastated country. And today from a former refugee, I am ambassador representing my country.
Congratulations. That's
in this-
wonderful.
In this amazing, friendly country here, and working to promote my country, to tell how people are really interested, how people are friendly and eager to learn and to be a part of the world. That energy and that thankfulness for having the chance. In fact, now recently seen at our sportists, it's only 3 years that Kosovo became member of Olympics.
That's right.
Or of FIFA or UEFA or other. And from the very first time our judokas participated in Rio in 2016, Maylina Kelmandi brought gold home. She started to build the history. And from that day, our judokas are I have to say, Kosovo is the first country in judo in the world.
Wow.
Sorry, Japan. I'm sorry, but today Kosovo
That's
is
impressive.
the best country. In football, for 15 games, we were unbeaten.
Wow.
And we played with the best football team in championship, in European championship. So it was after 15 games, the first defeat with the best in the world.
Wow.
Was 5-3. Girls, it's interesting that girls are flourishing. They took that chance with a very big seriosity. Uta Ibrahimi, Arineta Shala, and others are climbing the highest summits of the world.
My gosh.
They are everywhere, in karate, in ping pong, in judo, in football, in swimming. It's really that concentration of energy, of thankfulness.
Wow.
And I used to say that they are not playing only for themselves.
That's
They are
right.
playing for all the generation
That's right.
that didn't have a chance to do that.
Absolutely.
And IT and becoming online, in fact, helped us.
That's amazing.
It's really like a joke that even every grandmother have their Facebook page and their Instagram page, and in Kosovo's case, being online in fact helped to pass our message, to pass our story beyond. Earlier, in a way of communication where if you wanted to pass a message, you have to rent it a page in
Right.
New York Times for 150,000 or I don't know,
Right.
something like that. Or for politicians and officials to have the conference for media where they declare their stance, etc. Today, that's not happening anymore. The vice versa communication, the two-line communication through Facebook, through Twitter, through LinkedIn, through YouTube and other, in fact, made the world, as you say, as a beehive.
Yes.
As a beehive where
Yes.
you don't need special communication or special ability or special big budget
That's
to
right.
pass the message.
That's right.
And I think, are we prepared for this? I don't know. Are we preparing for this time? I think we are.
And we were talking about that, this breaking of the fourth wall. It's one of the reasons
Yes.
why we wanted to do this as a streaming channel, because we wanted to completely do away with that fourth wall and be able to engage with people directly on this topic and other topics, particularly around the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
But I cannot leave the topic without touching on consequences, right? For every choice, there's a consequence. And this is the second day of our 17 at 17 days of SDGs. So today is SDG 2 for us, which is zero hunger.
Yes.
And as I think about the really critical choice that was made to get connectivity, I wonder there were choices that were made not to focus perhaps on food and shelter, for example. Were there consequences at that time that maybe were short-term consequences for long-term gain?
That's right. That's right. If we talk about hunger, we can talk in two paths. The immediate hunger that you need to save people from death from the hunger.
That's right.
But in fact, we cannot underestimate the other component, and that component is to eradicate the hunger in longer term.
Exactly.
So if the first component is fulfilled, that people are alive,
Right.
then you need parallel to work also with to think about process. How can you make sustainable those people? How to eradicate the hunger, and not to make the hunger always as a first priority to keep them alive, but to make them sustainable to work. So I think this internet dish in Kosovo was in fact the second component, together with the first component to keep people alive. It helped people not to think about that emergency fight against hunger in a long term. So I think that when we think about second SDG, we always have to have also the component of securing them the life without hunger for generations.
I agree completely. And I think that that was an amazing choice that you made. So as we are wrapping up here, let's look at the future and look at some of the choices that are being made in the future. I wanted to see if we could have our Mexico studio join us. Rossana Fuentes, who is a part of an organization called Mexico Media Lab in Mexico. And she has a very interesting story because she works with different organizations on disruptive innovation, how it impacts, and she also looks at future of scenarios, including her book, which translates loosely as Click for Your Future. And it talks about the choices that a country like Mexico has to make for that next generation to click on their future, to move forward. And I thought it would be interesting to flip that conversation to her now, you know, just welcoming you and thanking you so much for joining us today, Rossana, and apologies for our technical difficulties this morning. But I would love to flip from what we've been talking about in Kosovo, a young nation coming online, making a really difficult choice between hunger and connectivity. And then flip over to an older nation like Mexico, where you're talking about looking at the digital revolution as an opportunity, as a future of scenario. Tell us a little about what you were thinking when you wrote that really inspiring book.
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your program. Thank you, Ambassador, for taking the time on a very busy week. I used to be a correspondent at the UN, and I know that this week is crazy in New York. So, Radia, don't worry about the technical problems. The technical sphere is always challenging, and it helps us do the best of all worlds, but also when it doesn't work, it's very unsettling. Let me tell you that when I was writing Mexico 2020, 2020 is the perfect vision. And I was writing this with the year in mind, 2020, next year, but also with the idea of a perfect vision. And I had 4 scenarios for Mexico. In all of them, I was writing this in 1994, 1995, the material came out in a newspaper in which I work at that time. And the technology part of what we were facing was important for me. Also, the SDGP number 2 was there, agriculture and hunger. And we know for a fact that now with internet and with the Internet of Things, agriculture can be more precise. But it has been a challenge in a country as young as Kosovo, as old as Mexico, to have the agriculture sector of our economies work. And I listened with great interest to what the ambassador was sharing with us. Yes, you have to make choices. And yes, in 2020, one of the big choices that one has to make is that if you can, because in some societies the capacity to do so is limited, if you can choose to have internet in agriculture, it's one of the best ways to go about managing your water supply, the precision of agriculture that is more likely to become a factor in filling your hunger needs. And I think that I wanted to know more about how this will work. But at the present time, choosing to do Internet of Things and agriculture is the way to go about for emerging markets, for poor countries, and also, to be honest, for developed economies.
I had another question for you. I read with interest your thoughts on the future of Mexico. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, on a day where we're talking about hunger, right? I'm thinking about some of the elements around the future of food. Do you have any thoughts on Mexico as a country, and as they're looking at the future? I mean, we're all looking at a future where there is a real fear that humanity is going to be larger than resources, that there already climate change is changing places where we can live. Water is drying up, so we're running out of water. And of course, we're eating a lot more meat than we can afford to keep on our lands. So do you have any thoughts on hunger, on food, as you look at some of your future of scenarios? And that may be quite specific for you.
Well, there's always this temptation to get all worked out and worried about the future in a negative way. I tend to sit on the positive side, not the Malthus side. Humanity time and again has been able to work its way through with technology and the willingness to use it and the generosity to use it. Let me go back in time and talk about a space, a geographical space in Mexico, in the north or western part of Mexico, where the Green Revolution started and then was exported to India. And yes, every country has a challenge, and we need to be conscious, responsible, and willing to acknowledge that the challenge is big, that that hunger currently and in the times to come is, as the goal number 2 of the UN shows, is something that we need to be aware and working all the time. But let me share with you that it was done then at the end of the Second World War, when many of the now developed countries were going hungry. And in Europe, in the spaces that we're talking about, in Eastern Europe, what is now Kosovo, there were hungry spaces as they are now in some of the geography of our country, that we need to look to answer and to be able to, with generosity and with technology, concentrate so that people in both the lower echelons of the society and at the top of the pyramid can be aware that their choices, as you were saying, Raida, they have consequences. And so if we choose to go with technology, which I think and admire, I was hearing what you did in Kosovo, and admiring, I say it's the best way to go.
One other thought I had, and I'll direct this back at you, Madam Ambassador, as you're looking at my definition, for example, of the exponential human, and the fact that I believe that we now have a digital double, right? We've got our physical spheres, so what we're doing here, but we have a digital double hanging out in cyberspace, a digital double that can be taken advantage of, data exhaust that takes our data much further than we can control. And yet it also gives us this sense of power. And I always find that there's this tug between knowledge and information that we're dealing with now, because there was a time when, in essence, information was knowledge, because we got our information from certain sources. It's just the world wasn't as open as it is now. Whereas now we actually have trafficked. I mean, people are trafficking in misinformation and disinformation to purposely change the trajectory of the world. And one of the reasons we put this show together is that the Secretary General of the United Nations said, let's make September, this United Nations General Assembly, a defining year to stop runaway climate change, to meet the SDGs. But how can we do that, in essence, if we don't engage, and Myra and I have talked about this a lot, this next generation of young people who are interested in making a difference? And I am struck by the fact that in Kosovo, you're saying most people are young people. Right. They are connected. And to be honest, most of them, and in essence, most of us, live online. So, you know, some thoughts from you on how the SDGs can benefit from connecting the ex-humans.
Oh, thank you. That's a very, very interesting topic. In fact, during the history of humankind, there were different revolutions. So it started with the invention of wheel and machines and going online and other. But now this revolution is not anymore about things that help people, help person. It's the revolution that is beyond the machines.
Yes.
With artificial intelligence and with these huge connectivity, in fact, we are not only helping person to give more productivity. This is going toward the edge of person itself. So now we are those who will be able to cope with this new revolution, or we will not.
Right.
And the decision that we are making today, in fact, will result in that whether we will be needed in the future or whether we will not be needed. In our previous conversation, you said we are not online only when we are sleeping. I think that we are online even when we
we're
are
sleeping.
We are monitored. How are we sleeping?
Exactly.
How are we waking up? When
Yes.
are we waking up?
Yes.
Which page are we looking first?
Yes.
And immediately after that, the advertisement for if you didn't have good sleep,
Right.
advertisement for sleep pills.
Right.
Or if you look at jewelry, tomorrow everything will be about that. So I think that this new revolution that is coming, I think that we really need to be prepared. I try to use the way how when cars were invented.
Yes.
It was a big resistance toward cars. Cars are not needed.
Exactly.
Cars kill people. Cars are going too fast,
Yes.
etc., etc. But nobody could stop that. Nobody could stop the progress. So what was our response? Not to stop it, but to regulate it. So there was invention of the signs and the regulations.
That's
and
right.
big fines and
Right.
other to keep control on that machines that in fact help us to live easier, better, more productive, etc. But entering to the phase when we are the subjects of that revolution, not anymore machines.
Correct.
When our data, our life, our sleep, our hunger for more clicks
That's right.
in our
Social media. That's correct.
or fake news
Yes.
that can in fact define the result of election, define the
Yes.
result whether you will bomb one country because it made aggression toward you or not.
That's right.
Deep fake news that in fact use the appearance of one person and put the words of other person in your, in fact, in some sort is scary.
Yes,
Do
it
we
is.
have the regulation for that? I don't see that up to now we have.
Yes.
We are in a phase of facing the consequences, and consequences are very obvious.
That's right.
I think that should be a wake-up call, not to block. We cannot block. We never could block the
Right.
evolution, whether it's evolution of machines or now with artificial intelligence or blockchain or anything.
That's
But
right.
I think that we need to use also SDGs and to think about that. How can Internet of Things, how can artificial intelligence,
That's right.
how can blockchain cryptocurrencies, how can these developments that are using the transformation of ourselves be in regulation for our benefit.
That's right.
And not putting us aside as not needed anymore.
Exactly.
So I think that SDGs need to think about this also.
I agree.
To foster the development that is going exponentially. We
Right.
cannot stop
Right.
that.
Whether or not we want it
but,
to, absolutely.
But to make them beneficial to humans and not humans to be side effects of the evolution.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That makes so much sense. I'll throw it over to you, Rossana, and ask you to put on your future of hat here.
As I was listening here with Mayra to the ambassador, there is a missing middle. Machines and humans are needed, and they're needed for different. They're needed for different reasons. A human is needed to lead, to create, to innovate. It's needed because we are able to improvise. A machine cannot improvise, but they can do faster some of the transactions. They can iterate better than we do. So there's need for both of us. There's need for machines as well as for humans. There was a time at the first industrial revolution when some people were afraid of what was going on with the machines, and in that sense, they wanted to stop progress, and those are called the Luddites. And we know for a fact that you cannot stop progress, that you should not stop progress.
Yes.
And I think that on the 21st century, one needs to concentrate on what you're saying about the xHuman, the exponential human. We need to look at the future with more security and more interest on how we can use the machines, how they can free us, how they can help those of us that are less privileged, and look at discussions that are based on the fact that there's no way that we can stop what is going on, but we need, as the ambassador was saying, to regulate it so that the world is a better space.
Thank you very much. We'll leave it there with you, Madam Ambassador. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We look forward to welcoming you again soon. Enjoy
Thanks
the
a
rest
lot.
of your day. Our second guest here that I would love to invite is Alexandra Akira. Alexandra is just wonderful. She has the best background. She's the CEO of an organization called Next Level Productions. She also works very closely with Model United Nations, and she's an Impact Senior Advisor to the United Nations Office of Partnerships, as well as working with the Secretary General's Youth Envoy. Alexandra, I would love to welcome you to join me and bring you in on the conversation. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
So while you mic yourself, it's Do It Your Mic Day. I would like to hearken over to a transition. So one of the reasons I wanted both you and Rossana to hang out together in this conversation is that there's a similarity in your background. Media, production, that element of the tech space. And, Rossana has done some work with World Economic Forum, and you have delved very deeply into the United Nations.
Yes.
You and I hang out here just as if we do work here. And so I wanted to take this in more of the direction of the genesis of the Sustainable Development Goals, because you're one of the few people I know that was in the room when these Sustainable Development Goals were being created. Yes. And also part of that journey of adoption, which was, I'm sure, quite a journey. I know that when I entered the UN system, it was 2016, and we had the goals for, not yet a year. But we certainly had them, and you had gone past that adoption period. So one of the things I'd love for you to do is kind of tell us a little bit about the genesis of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes, it was quite an experience and one that I will never forget. And thank you for welcoming me today, and congratulations on Built in Places' new portal. Very excited about that.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. I started in philanthropy probably almost 30 years ago.
Wow.
I worked with city, state, and federal government agencies here in the United States. And I also helped with the culmination of the 9/11 benefits after the tragedy. Wow. And it really kind of spurred a big interest in me to get more involved in environmental issues, clean water issues, and things of that nature. And probably, I guess it was about 10 years ago when they were trying to frack New York City for shale gas. We started a coalition in New York with 6 people upstate, and very influential people, and we turned those 6 people into over 100,000 organizations across the United States. And we, within 3 years, got the ban on fracking here in New York.
Wow.
That led me to a lot of conversations about sustainable and renewable energy. And I was invited through a Sustainable Business Conference to speak in Washington. And President Obama's Environmental Secretary heard me speak and said, with your background and what your interests are, I think you should go to the UN.
Oh boy, and that's where the story begins.
So that's where the story begins. Just thought I would cue that up for a second. So I came to the UN, and at the time, there was a lot of conversation about what we're going to do from the Millennium Development Goals and how those are going to transition into something else, and the word sustainable development goals started circulating. So I joined a couple of groups. I was also invited, I was spending a lot of time in Rio de Janeiro at the time, and there was the Rio Plus 20 conference there.
That's right.
And that's where the SDGs really kind of took hold.
Oh, interesting.
And people started really talking about it. And through that meeting became an open working group that started in January of 2013. So I really kind of, got in the really beginning stages of having full inclusion,
Right.
that all stakeholders were finally going to be invited in to not only the member states, but all the 57 agencies, and to really be able to have a voice that made a difference, because it's the people on the ground
That's right.
that are taking care of their communities. It's the regional offices throughout the United Nations with those 57 agencies that really do a lot of the work, in
Right.
addition to the adoption of different policies and so forth through the member states that are then adopted by the governments.
That's right.
So it really was an unbelievable experience to learn about how all this worked. So one of the first groups that I worked with was for being able to create SDG 14, Life Above Water for oceans. I'm a big oceans girl.
Yes,
and,
absolutely.
It was an unbelievable experience because we started with maybe a group of 10 people, and it grew to scientists and major corporations and the Office of Legal Affairs and Partnerships Office, and it just kept really growing really organically. It was really wonderful, and that was part of what was adopted. Mm-hmm. So it took about 3 years for us to create what are now the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, targets, and indicators that were created. So it was 5 days a week here at the UN.
Yes, because it's a complex set of goals.
8:15 in the morning until sometimes 8 o'clock at night, running from session to session, and really understanding how these goals were created, what the language needed to say, how the member states voted on it, and all of the parliamentarians that were included in all of that. And so there were a number of civil society participants, including myself, that were invited into these meetings. And it was extraordinary.
Yes.
Because a lot of people look at the UN as it lives in a silo.
Yes.
It's so bureaucratic.
Yes.
Yes, it is at some points. But if you can look beyond that and think about, the UN is the only body in the world that has 193 member state countries.
Exactly.
That eventually will all agree on something. And what's great is through all of the hard work, and I just want to make mention of Makaria Kamau, who was the ambassador of Kenya at the time, was one of the co-facilitators of these meetings that we had for the adoption. He was really extraordinary. He really reached out to a lot of NGO civil society participants on a regular basis, including myself, and really wanted to understand what was most important to us. And there was an open working group that consisted of hundreds of people, and he really did take the time to speak to a lot of them. And it was great because we had a lot of meetings here at the UN with a lot of agencies. Women and girls were, a very big conversation point. Yes. Food and agriculture, which I heard you discussing earlier. I have a lot to say about that space. And then clean water, eradication of poverty and hunger also has always been within the UN system. But really being able to launch this, adopt it in September 2015 during the General Assembly, and really see it excel, and have been, part of that whole evolution. I'm so very proud to see that from what I understand from all of my agency folks that I work with here, is that it is the most successful campaign of the United Nations there are millions of people that are heavily involved in the implementation of the SDGs. And I think it's pretty extraordinary that a lot of NGOs on the ground have used that as a roadmap to become more sustainable in their communities, not only for themselves, but for their families and their communities. And interesting, my friends in Mexico, I spent quite a lot of time there over the last year, forming some really great partnerships. And I met with the president of the Tec du Monterrey, who's a very good friend of some friends of mine from Cinépolis, who's another partner of mine. And we spoke, one of the main conversations was implementing the SDGs in all the schools, high schools, colleges, but the technology transfer was one of the most important issues that they're having, that they want to try to fix. So we're working regularly on trying to help bring more NGOs and corporations and all stakeholders to the table so that we can switch that problem up. One of the projects that I really worked on as well here and created a lot of concept notes was on enhancing technology transfer around the world. And as you know,
Yes.
Facebook and Google and all the big tech companies are already partners of the UN. And I think they're trying to establish ways of how they can all work together, because it must be inclusive. It can't just be one person or one company or one agency doing something, not on the level to which it needs to get to so that we can really change the narrative on that. And I think slowly we are getting there. And I think as you can really see around the world, there are many more companies that are advertising that they're a proud sponsor and partner of the SDGs. And I think that we need to just keep that conversation moving. And that is really how I got started.
Thank you. That was just an an incredible story.
Thank you.
And thank you for all your hard work on that, because I agree with you. I think it's the best framework we have. And you know, people always say, well, the UN is so bureaucratic, how can you work with them? But I always say it's the best UN we have, because there is only one organization where we can all get together in a place that isn't just our political sector. I mean, it's everybody's political sector, especially the 193 member states that are part of the UN. But when I hear technology transfer, it makes me think, Rossana again, your organization does amazing work with helping other organizations with disruptive technology, with disruptive innovation, handling and utilizing disruption. And I think it would be a very interesting thing here to talk about a little bit about your organization, about your thoughts on both that disruption as something that organizations deal with, but also looking at the United Nations, where when I came here, we were looking to power the SDGs with technology, right? The Science, Technology, Innovation Forum was forming around the Sustainable Development Goals. And we were saying, we need technologists all over the world. I went on a little bit of a campaign to Silicon Valley to engage them and say, this is how you can play with the UN on technology. We want your exponential, your frontier, and your emerging tech. And we want to figure out how we integrate blockchain and AI and robotics to really partner with you and your technologies to help drive a set of goals that really couldn't have happened if we weren't looking at this era, which I'm calling the era of the xHuman. But Rossana, tell us a little about your thoughts, what your organization does, with other companies, and then any, kind of learnings and thoughts for the UN, as you listen to this, the challenges on technology and innovation and the Sustainable Development Goals, period.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for the great effort, Alejandra. And yes, the Tec de Monterrey and big Mexican companies, multinational Mexican companies like Cinépolis, are very important in what we call at Mexico Media Lab corporate startup collaboration. There's no way that the startup scene or the small and medium enterprises can grow without the force of larger companies helping them introduce their novelty into the mainstream. And what Mexico Media Lab does is set up the stage so that you can have small and medium companies adopting technology. In emerging markets in Mexico, most of the employment is given by these companies. Although we have giants, and those are very important, and we feel very proud about seeing Mexican companies go about the world, we have most of the employment in our country given by small and medium-sized companies. So we need for them to be able to adapt technology. And for that reason, what we do is that we have within Mexico Media Lab something called Lab 4. And this is for companies of small and medium size to be able to make a diagnosis and prove where they are. Everybody has a device. Most of the companies and the individuals in this earth now have devices. But how do you use these devices? Your smartphone, your computer makes a difference in how you present yourself in the economic realm. And what we do at Lab 4 is that we allow them to enter a platform, prove with 50 questions where they are, and then we go about doing boot camps to introduce them to concepts that have been spoken about here. Cybersecurity, marketing, digital marketing. How do you go about using your data? We all produce data, but how do you organize the data that is produced by your company to the benefit of your company and your community? That sort of thing is what we do.
With regards to your data aggregation, we work very closely with a company called Esri, and they're based in California. And I've worked with them for over 25 years.
Wow.
They have what's called GIS.
Yes.
It's Geographic Information System Platform. And they have very, very good rates for not-for-profit agencies. They're recognized globally by most government agencies around the world. And they provide the most intense demographic profiling in the world. In addition to demographic profiling for humans, they also are able to aggregate data with regards to infrastructure within cities. So you can basically create reports. How many people are there, what their income level classes are, the ages, and so forth, and 200 or 300 different types of things that are involved with demographics. But it actually maps out cities as well. And what it does is it feeds all that information into the government agencies, okay? What the UN has done recently is has adopted the Esri platform across the entire United Nations system. And agencies can now sign up to use Esri to aggregate that data in conjunction with the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and then it gets fed in.
That's right.
To the entire data office here. So then we can really start looking at the narrative of how we're moving the needle and the narrative towards obtaining the successful implementation of the goals. So I would highly suggest that people around the world use Esri within their budgets, and they're willing to work with.
I was going to say, Esri's going to love this shout out.
Well, I love Esri. I just love them. I think they're fantastic, and they've really expanded their platform, where they also have a storytelling platform within Esri, and it basically lets you kind of create almost a narrative within a video platform, and you're able to just continue using that and be able to tell a story. And because I work in the youth space a lot,
That's right.
we're able to have our youths use the Esri platform. They're able to shoot their footage. They're able to curate an entire story and edit it and be able to put it up online, and then it lives evergreen within your platform. And if you do that, then you can get in touch with your regional offices on the ground, no matter where you live in the world, and you can feed that data into that office, and that office then works with the government agencies, and then it's a beautiful story, because then the UN gets all that data and they start getting more serious about how we're moving the needle with the successful implementation of the SDGs. And I would highly suggest anyone that may be watching this to look in ESRI and find out how you can sign up. I think they have 1 month trials as well. It's an
ESRI should have paid us for this, honestly.
It's an extraordinary platform. Like I said, I've been using them for a really long time.
Very cool.
And I think that a lot of what was missing before here was, how do we get the data?
Right.
That was the conversation through the
data.
culmination of the SDGs. But if people start using this platform and it's adopted here, it might be something that you may want to consider.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome.
What an advert. So I wanted to bring in Myra here. Myra hanging out as our anchor out there in Mexico, and thank you so much, Myra. Myra is just a wonderful young social entrepreneur who has done some amazing things with Casa Jammer and has built a little empire of hers in Mexico. It looks like we're not getting that feed. Ah, I see. I wanted to bring in Mexico at this point, but it looks like we're having technical difficulties again with Mexico. So since we're quite frozen with Mexico, maybe you and I can conclude this conversation and see if Mexico can join us at some point.
Okay, great.
So I was interested in your thoughts about bringing the exponential human, that concept, into the UN. So one of the reasons I decided to do this here is because there were UN colleagues who said, you should really think about how you roll this out to the public sector. And I thought the best way to roll it out to the public sector is at a place where, as you said, 193 nations are attending. So we're here, we're hanging out with the UN folks, but having you around, you and I both know what it's like to be on the inside and the outside of the UN. Some of the challenges, not because our colleagues at the UN don't want to enact something new and innovative and interesting, but because there is some difficulty to adoption given the many, shall we say, guardrails in place for the many things that could possibly go wrong, for things that impact so many people's lives. And I completely understand that. But what are your thoughts as we're thinking about coevolution of human and machine, and we're thinking about how we can interject that energy, especially in the digital space, back into the UN? What are your thoughts on how one can do that? And I'm interested in that because one of the things you have done is a technology transfer, and you've had different technology transfer discussions. So in your opinion, where can the UN go from here?
I think that the more technical expertise in this space, including yourself, needs to have a conversation with the people in the maybe Deputy Secretary and Undersecretary General's office that have the power to adopt the thought of this and to be able to create some sessions that would be most relevant in countries where this is most needed. Obviously, in the United States, it's already here.
Exactly.
We're already doing it.
Right. At least we think we are.
Yeah, exactly. But I think with the power of the Partnerships Office and the UN Global Compact and the corporations that are involved there, I think there needs to be a conversation about it. And I think that if there could be a way to curate some sessions during an appropriate week.
Agreed.
Where this would be specifically understood, because here at the UN, if you want to talk about women and girls, for the most part, you want to be here during the Commission on the Status of Women conference in March. You know, you want to talk about oceans, you're going to be here in June.
Right.
So why not start thinking about what part of the year would be most appropriate to open up this conversation? Because I guarantee you, you will have many companies that will want to jump on board.
Agreed.
That will also sponsor these conversations. And I think that being that it's a global conversation,
Correct.
some countries can't even think about doing something like this. But what we need to start really thinking about from an entire stakeholder perspective, that we can all come together from a public-private sector and internally with all the agencies here and bring this to the table and say, what can we do about this? Who can we bring in to move the needle? And is there a prototype that we can create where we could launch it in other countries around the world so we can basically teach them the beauty of what you're discussing right now? And I think that that would be something that I'm sure that you can probably curate, or we can try to curate that together. I can help you with, or bring some agencies in where it would be most relevant. We have somebody here from ITU today.
Yes, we do.
You know, it's something that your office, I'm sure, would probably want to get involved in as well.
Actually, they already are.
Okay, and then but I mean, really bring this to a head.
Right.
I mean, we really need to
Really
start
get involved.
Really, but even just kind of bring it to the next level.
That's right.
And I think one thing that we talk about a lot, and I know that I've discussed this in Mexico a lot, is job creation. Job creation is one of the biggest things that everyone speaks about within the youth space. Why not bring in the International Labor Organization?
That's right.
ILO, ITU, and whoever else we need to bring to the table, and really sit down and figure this out and launch something so that we can align with Agenda 2030 and be able to carry this through for the next 10 years, because we are the caretakers of the planet.
That's right.
We're the shepherds for the younger generation.
That's
and
right.
It's our responsibility, as our Secretary General said during our MUN Impact Conference that we had a couple of months ago. You know, the older generation unfortunately made a lot of damage here on the planet.
Right.
So we want to try to fix that so that the younger generation can live in a much more peaceful and sustainable world.
That is just perfectly said. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It looks like we have Mexico back. And before Rossana has to leave us, Rossana, I wanted to give you the last word on this. We had thrown it over to you before and we were having technical difficulties. But I wanted to give you the last word on this as we are talking about bringing in the United Nations more fully into the conversation of human and machine coevolution and how that can help with one of their greatest, I mean, I would say a lot of their highest priorities, but SDGs is up there, you know, and climate change gets a little divorced from SDGs because it has risen so above the watermark, right? So it gets a little divorced. But in your thoughts, as somebody who brings this kind of thinking to organization, I'd like to throw that to you for the last word. How would you advise the United Nations to move forward?
Well, there's a specific SDG goal, number 8, that talks about employment. You were passing on the torch to Mayra. I don't know if you want to talk about employment in Mexico.
No, I think you want to
Okay.
finish it.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. I wish that I could stay longer, but I have to work. And so I have to go back to the office. But Mexico is a country of young people. The demographics, we were talking about data. The demographics show us that that is a blessing and that we are able to move with more flexibility than in countries where the aging population is bigger. But at the same time, the challenge is of enormous proportions because we need to create jobs for them. That's why, going back to what we do at Mexico Media Lab, we think that creating jobs, opening up entrepreneurship spirits in new companies, in old companies, and in middle and small businesses, we can help the youngsters of our country use their talent and their creativity. And going back to what we were saying, between the humans and the machines, the concept that you have introduced, Radia, the xHuman, you need to think of this as an opportunity, not as a threat. I would encourage the youngsters to think that this is the best of all times. Women, girls, boys, men, we can use this as an opportunity. We need to be responsible with our planet, but there are in 2030 the goals to achieve. And if were it not to be there, we would need to invent again the United Nations, because it's the best hope for humanity to go about introducing big ideas, big changes. And in that, we all need to be aware and conscious that this is the way to go about it. Collective work, cooperation, and international respect for all countries. Thank you very much for having me here. I wish that I could stay longer, as I said, but I'm sure that I can look at the stream later and see what conclusions you reach. Thank you, Mayra. Thank you, the team that is here, for having me all. And thank you, New York, for inviting me.
Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Have an amazing day. Thank you for joining the conversation. We look forward to continuing it. And I'm going to turn back to you, my dear.
Have a good day, ladies. Thank you.
Have a good day. And Mayra, don't leave us, Mayra, because we have to throw this to the next generation after we're done talking here, because we do have some panelists on the Mayra's side that, as we are talking about shepherding, we would like to be able to throw it over to that next generation that are going to take that piece, take that ball and run with it. So I would like this ball.
That's a great
I have
ball.
a toy.
It's a great SDG ball. I love
An
that.
SDG ball.
It's a great soccer ball. I love it too.
And one of the things that I would like us to leave, kind of our last note, and thank you for suffering through our technology.
Oh, it's fine.
Fun technology
all
problems today. But before we throw it over to Mayra, I just wanted us to just talk about this concept of shepherding. And I feel like with the advent and the rise of this concept of the exponential human, that the exponential human, just with the fact that we have this digital double in technology, in the digital space, but we also have these little machines that are bigger and stronger, even though they're tinier, and far more powerful than the machines that took us to the moon 50 years ago. So if you look at the culmination of everything that we have now, we are the most powerful humans that have ever lived. Yet, our leaders, our UNs and our USs and our country heads of state, as they're coming in next week to this UN General Assembly here, and they're coming to have conversations, closed-door conversations that don't include that next generation, that do not know how to invite them in, right? We hear this a lot. We want to involve the next generation. And the UN says that all the time. There is that desire to engage, but there isn't necessarily an understanding of where to begin.
Well, I think the conversations are changing. I think that Jayathma Wickramanayake, who is the youth envoy,
That's right.
is working very hard to change that. I think this Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, has done a really great job of supporting that office, as I support that office. They are really trying to get world leaders to adopt the policy with the SDGs. As we have said time and time again today, it is a fantastic roadmap.
That's right.
For people to really figure out what's most important to me, and let me pick 1, 2, 3, or all of them, and incorporate it into our lives. I think this General Assembly is going to be quite different, as the Climate Summit is before.
That's right.
As the Youth Envoy will be speaking again about her second year of the implementation of her agenda. I think with Greta Thunberg being here and the climate strike that's happening on Saturday the 20th.
That's right.
And that's a global movement that's
right.
happening. I think that all of these things together are starting to be more relevant within the member state community, and them understanding, especially
That's
with
critical.
Guterres saying a couple of months ago that, we made this mess, we left it with you, and now we've got to try to figure out how we can work together and support you. That conversation was not here 5
Yes,
years ago.
absolutely not.
It's here now because you have the youth of the world on the ground doing stuff, and they're not afraid to talk about it. And I think the power of social media has definitely enhanced the ability to getting their word out, but having it globally transmitted where it can be is really making people start to think, well, wow, I can do that in my community.
That's right.
Well, wow, I can do that. How can I learn from you? And when you have platforms like MUN Impact, and you have platforms like World Merit, and you have a lot of these other platforms around the world that have their websites and their portals set up. They're telling their stories, they're showing their footage, and they're making people really rethink what they're doing. So when they have these problems, they can actually learn online. And by the way, this isn't a phone, this is a computer.
It is.
The computer that has a phone. So there's all kinds of really cool things that we can all do. And it's getting these technology companies, getting this next gen.
Yes.
Okay, and these
them
millennials that
involved.
have the money that can develop these platforms.
That's right.
That could engage with all of these NGOs and really start making a difference. And I think that what you're saying is correct to a certain extent, but I think that there's a lot more that's being done.
That's right.
And that the opportunities for the youth of the world to really start talking about what's happening, I think those opportunities are starting to grow.
Yes.
And I think that there's a lot of corporations in the world that are starting to realize we need to get into the youth space.
Yes.
We need to really start engaging with them because they really are making a difference. And the great thing about it is there is no fear, no matter where they live, whether it be in Lebanon or whether it is in Iraq or in Saudi or in Morocco, Tanzania, wherever you are, there is an all-time high of human and social justice.
Absolutely.
And the SDGs allows you to get there in a really coerced way where, again, as I said earlier, I think it's really important for NGOs to realize that there are regional offices from the United Nations that are in most of these cities, and it's about getting connected to them so that you can work in partnership together and really make a difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for spending
Such
the
a
time. We
pleasure to
really,
be
really
here.
appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you for the
please
opportunity.
continue to stay engaged with us on
I
this. I
will,
mean,
for
you
sure.
are doing so much in that space, and we
Thank
would
you.
love to keep talking with you.
Yes, for
Thank
sure.
you very much.
You're
Enjoy the rest
welcome.
of your day.
And you too. Have
Thank
a
you.
great General Assembly.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Hola, Mexico. Yay. So, Myra, I was singing your praises. I was singing your praises earlier, but then we lost you. So I'd like to pick up where I left off. And I was talking to our audience a little bit about why you have just been an amazing person to get to know and to work with. And these wonderful things that you have done with the social jammers, this concept that we're talking about here of being the shepherds and then passing this on to the next generation. And that's you, that next generation that is using the power of technology, social media. I mean, you do this all the time as a social entrepreneur. You have built this amazing space to bring in other social entrepreneurs. And we at Build and Blaze are thrilled to be able to start engaging you, and in so doing, other nations as well into these conversations about what the UN should be doing, how the UN should be including the youth. So what I'd love to do here is turn it over to you for a little introduction about who you are and who your panelists are for a few hours, a couple of hours, I don't remember how long, but we would like to be able to now flip over to your panelists. And of course, we have another panelist here that will join you, but I wanted to turn it over to you for your comments, your thought, and let's jam a little, because this is our jam session. Let's jam a little about what we've talked about earlier in the day, what your thoughts are, your reaction, and then of course, let's bring in your panelists.
Thank you, Radia. Thank you to the audience. Well, this is Casa Jammer. Basically, we do promote and contribute to join social entrepreneurs together. Today, I'm with two young social entrepreneurs. I'm going to tell you a little about them in a minute. But first of all, I want to stay with two thoughts about our earlier panelists. One is Ambassador Teuta was talking about revolutions. And I want to leave this question open so we do a jam session. First, she was saying we are living in a revolution area, and I do believe we are in the revolution of being connected, so we do exist. Young generations are really in a need to exist. So I think that's the way. That's why we use social media. That's why we're looking, for likes. That's why we're looking for a comments in our social media feeds. But still, young generations are in social media, but they are still not connected with these SDGs and with these leaders that are changing the world, or maybe that are trying to change in the world. So I want to leave this jam open, because how do we connect this generation that is connected to media, to our leaders, and to the SDGs? So we use technology not just to get likes, but to get, like evolution and to really save the world. That's the first thought I want to leave. The second one is about another generation of young people using technology, IoT, robotics, and everything in order to help poor people or producers. Rossana was talking about agriculture, specifically because we are talking about zero hunger today. Today we're talking about the SDG number 2, that is zero hunger. And I'm really glad to say that we have a lot of social entrepreneurs here working with us in Casa Jammer, that they are doing actually a really progress between technology and agriculture. They are using this big data that machines gave them, so they can help producers to tell them how much water they need, how much rain is coming this year. So they have they have intelligence, to use these tools in order to provide food to others. So I'm gonna leave these two questions open for the jam with your panelists. And now, Radia, I'm gonna introduce my guest today. I have Luis Gerardo Arandia Uribe. He is CEO at Preneur and Corion Academy. He is organizing a congress with the SDGs for kids and for young people. Just give me 1 second, Radia, because we're running out of battery. So can you check the computer? La batería de la computadora. Conéctalo porque no está grabando. Sorry. So that's our first guest. The second one is Julio César Dovalina Soriano. He's director of the Campaign for Human Rights and World Peace. Alexandra was just talking about justice. We have to have justice when we are doing the SDGs, because sometimes it goes to the, to big companies or to companies that are well supplied, but we have to have justice. So the SDGs go in different levels. So I want to leave this jam open. Radia, with you, I want to go back with your panelists so we can start jam and going through the questions. I think Radia is gone.
I think what we had, sorry, can you hear me? I hope we're not having more technical difficulties, but with our technical difficulties earlier, we actually, I think, missed a couple of panelists who were supposed to be here. So I'm hearing that we only have about an hour to do a little bit of a jam session. So I would love for us to, I'd love to throw this back to you, Myra. Perhaps you can introduce, there is one New York panelist here who I'm not sure if she's prepared to join us yet, but Ada Murad has just walked in, and I just saw her lovely face, and I thought it'll be really nice to have her join us now and maybe jam with us for a little bit. And I know that you were going to introduce her. I know I jumped the gun because I saw her. But do you want to go ahead and introduce this lovely lady?
Yes, I would love to. Well, Ada Murad, she's co-director of MENA and Arab Diaspora Nexus Global Summit. I think we're a little bit of a delay. This is part of
Magic micing here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
So before I leave you jammers with your honorary jammer here in New York, I think one of the things we wanted to talk about today is social entrepreneurship and youth entrepreneurship. You know, to be honest, when I see faces like yours and what you are doing, and as we talk about the next generation at the UN, what we don't see very often are young people like you, perhaps a select few, 2-3 people in a closed room that allegedly represent the world, but not enough opening it up to people who have an interest.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do with this platform was not select those people that perhaps can allegedly stand out above the fray, but rather open up the panel to people who have an interest.
Yeah.
If you have an interest, you're welcome to join. If the SDGs are of interest, if it's technology that you're interested in, if you don't care about the SDGs, but you really do care about climate change, or you care about your oceans, I mean, you're welcome. And Myra, you struck me as this go-getter, amazing woman who had an interest in marshaling social entrepreneurs to do good, to change the world. How many times have we said, we're going to change the world together? and I would love to, you know, throw this over to you. I believe you have a couple more panelists, but I know that Ada is one of your panelists and I'm intruding on it, so I will leave, but I just wanted to throw over to you as you guys are talking about this, that next generation of entrepreneurship, that integration back into the United Nations. How do we stop being shepherds only, right? Because shepherds will imply sheep. And in my mind, the exponential human that I've been studying, that evolution over the last 7 years, that is not a group of sheep. I don't know if ever they were or ever we were, but most certainly today's human has enough power that they can most definitely be the wolf.
100%.
And they can drive a lot of these things that we are shepherding. So with that, Myra, I'm going to leave you with your panel. You know, thank you very much, and I'll see you back in, what, about an hour?
Yes.
Thank you, Ada. Thank you, Radia. Well, I'm going to start with Luis because he has to leave in 5 minutes, and then I'm going to invite to another guest, that is Cecilia Torriago. But I want to start with Luis because he's doing a great job with young people. Luis, can you tell us what are you doing with these kids and the SDGs?
Yeah, well, I'm going to try to speak in English because it's difficult to me.
Perfect.
We, through video, through photos, and project printing, to know how the kids perceive and how they can resolve these problematics through the technologies, prototyping in 3D, using VR, using BI, using machine learning. So it's amazing how the kids involve the people, involve your families, the organizations, to commitment and resolve the problematic. And it's grateful to all the team that we can see the
Cultivate seed.
to positive impact. We know that we are not changing the world, but maybe the life in each one kids, you can develop, you can have an integral development because the spiritual, the emotional, the physical, and the it's difficult. I am trying to. You are a guide for these kids, and you are bring a platform for in the future. But now you can create now another conscious, another sensations to really incorporate these technologies and los enseñamos, teach us to create a synergy to the experienced people, the young people, and the kids. Because we create that this context, this synergy in these generations, solo así we can change the context in Mexico and in other world.
Thank you, Luis. Elia, talking about what Luis is saying, he basically does a wonderful work, because what we're trying to do here at Casa Jammer is to create conscious about how to be an entrepreneur, but with social consciousness. And Luis is doing this before, like he's going one step before us, and he's like trying to actually teach the kids. So when they grow up, they can be entrepreneur, and they can think, like if they do a business, they are doing a social business, because these kids are going to be more prepared about what SDGs are, and they're going to have like more conscious about like there is a need for zero hunger, and there is a need to end poverty, and there is a need for education of quality. So basically what he's doing is a great job. Like, I don't know, in your experience, what you can tell us about how is being your process by teaching and working with youth in social entrepreneurship.
So first, I always like to start with how I became an entrepreneur myself, a social entrepreneur. One, I never planned it. It came out of necessity. So I was semi-paralyzed at some point when I was in college. And in order to pay my bills, I needed to sell everything I owned. And then I went back to Jordan, so I'm Palestinian Jordanian. I went back to Jordan, and I just noticed, I observed that there was a market for me to start entering the sustainable fashion world at that time. So it was without really planning my life to be an entrepreneur, because I was really raised in a sense where once I graduate from college, I'm going to get married and I'm going to have children and I'm going to go follow that path. It was never really expected for me to build a company when I was 20 years old. And now I'm at the end of my 20s, so it's been an interesting journey. But I always start with, I wish I was taught earlier that I can actually be an entrepreneur and prepare myself through education, from similar to what you were saying, from a young age. So that's one. Two is education, I've noticed, has played a very important role and is changing right now, because it takes a whole ecosystem in order for someone to build a really powerful and impactful business. And meaning private sector, public sector, educational institutions, nonprofits, etc. Right now, I'm in the health tech space. So I'm tackling SDG number 3 through a company called Homulux, where we're tackling Alzheimer's disease, which is the 6th leading cause of death in the US. The reason I mentioned that is because I never planned to be in the Alzheimer's space. I never thought, to be honest, that I would work on SDG number 3. It just happened. And always, whenever now I mentor youth or work with youth, or even with myself, I keep reminding myself to not really have a rigid plan, because life will throw you things and opportunities that actually will surprise you. And what attracted me to Homulux, the company I work with, is that there was a real deep need to solve a crisis. And Alzheimer's disease is a global crisis that is not talked about enough. And so kind of wrapping up to answer your question is, one, we need to start from a young age to excite people and prepare people to be entrepreneurs, because it's not for the faint-hearted. It's a hard journey. And many days you doubt yourself, you wonder where you're going to get funding, you wonder if you have the right science, if you have the right team. It's really a private sector approach, but with impact implemented in it, right? So I always try to remind young people that don't be so rigid in your plans. Impact, 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 because the future is, if in private sector, if you're not talking about impact, you're no longer relevant. So I'll just pause there and see if you have any questions.
I want to add something. Thank you, Ada. What is to be an entrepreneur when we have a lot of things to solve in this planet? I mean, Luis is trying to help these kids to understand that it's important to be an entrepreneur. But what happened when you are like at 6 years, maybe, or 7 years, and you know, like, we are running out of water and we are like, most of the population, you know, they don't have food, and there is a lot of inequalities, there's not inclusion, and we're fighting against like a lot of things. So how is to be an entrepreneur when we are like actually struggling a lot of problems in the world?
I'll start with one key point, is you can't solve everything. If you're trying to solve everything, you're solving nothing. So, for example, I'm highly focused right now on Alzheimer's disease. And how can I push the needle forward to help solve this crisis? I find myself trying, sometimes, oh shoot, there's a food problem, shoot, there's a gender inequality, all the 17 SDGs, but I can't, to make a difference, I have to discipline myself and deep dive into one area, knowing that it takes an ecosystem to move something forward. So one, you need to make sure that you have your basic needs met. It's that kind of that hierarchy of needs. So ensuring that the youth have that, they have a safe place to go home, they have food, basic food. And then one needs to monitor, once they're safe, what is their passion? Because if you're not passionate about what you do, and you don't wake up excited to solve this very specific problem, you will burn out and you won't solve anything. But another point that I add is a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, do this mistake, is we work day and night. Meaning, if we don't take care of our own health, going to kind of back to SDG number 3, there's a mental health component. If you as an entrepreneur don't take care of your own mental health and sustain your energy, you're not going to be here tomorrow to help solve that specific problem that you chose. So what I would say is pick a problem, not all the problems. Be passionate about it because it's a hard journey. 3, take care of yourself.
Thank you, Ada. I think Luis has a question.
Yeah, I have a question. How you articulate the ecosystem in the context like countries like Mexico?
How do I articulate the ecosystem in where? Sorry, I couldn't hear the rest of the question.
In the ecosystem, the context in Mexico is different from the other countries. In the United States, it's different how you articulate the iniciativa privada, the academy, the government, and los organismos
Organizations,
no gubernamentales.
So let me give you a concrete example of what I'm currently working on and to show you the power of an ecosystem. So Homulux is a basically a health and tech company that is bringing a wellness device to help solve the Alzheimer's crisis. How did we even get to this technology? MIT, which is an educational institution, got funding and did years of research on a science. And this funding comes from both governmental institutions and from private sector and from foundations. So they did the work, they launched the science, publicized it, and then the private sector uses this science, build the technology, and brought it to market. So you see, even just from that very small example, we already have multiple players in the ecosystem building something to life, bringing it to market. But once you do that, that's not enough. You need the media companies to cover that Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in the US. And it's a global crisis. There's about 50 million people living with it. Then you need the nonprofits who are going to do grassroots efforts and community building efforts in order to help people who are giving countless hours of their time to care for people who are living with Alzheimer's. You see what I mean? So now we just integrated media organizations, and now we integrated nonprofits to push the awareness of this problem and to engage people from the bottom up. And then you need the government, right, to help fund certain elements that the private sector just cannot do or are not interested in doing. So that's just a very small micro example of how different players play in something. And I also worked in Jordan, where that's where I built my first company. And it was very hard, I'll be frank, to build a company there because I did not have a healthy ecosystem to be an entrepreneur. And another element and complication for me was being a woman, that people were not used to seeing women as entrepreneurs. So there's a whole culture element that is part of this ecosystem as well that needs to be addressed to actually have a healthy one. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, I think Luis he has to leave. So I'm going to invite another panelist to our jam session. Thank you, Luis, for being here. Elia, don't go, please.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to invite Cecilia Turriago. She's going to join us. I want to introduce Cecilia Turriago to the audience and to you, Ada. Cecilia Turriago, she's managing partner Impact Capital. And she's today joining us because she has a lot of things to say about how women are trying to be more inclusive in a men's world. Did I say it right, Ceci?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
It's not only about that, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
I'm actually I'm working across the different SDGs, but of course, number 17. I'm part of the private sector and mentored for over 15 years now. I got engaged and passionate about social entrepreneurship about 15 years ago, and it actually has evolved into impact entrepreneurship, profit, people, planet. Because at the end of the day, if you are an entrepreneur and you're actually working for profit, it should be measurable, both on the financial side and what is the impact that you have on the planet and on the society you're working in. So that being said, it's not only about how this came into being. Is I have a private equity background, and after working with entrepreneurs, I realized that what really moves me is what they are trying to achieve and what is the best way to catalyze that. And we put together a women-led fund. We are first-time managers, although we're angel investors. It seems that it doesn't quite count for the big institutional players. And we got to what is it that we want to change with this particular fund. And what moves us is we are committed to diversifying the investor base, and that being by targeting actively women and young investors. And why do we want to have young investors on the table? And we've heard it time and again, because some of them are on the entrepreneurial working in this industry at a very young age. Once they just graduated from their first degree, they are the ones doing the work in the funds. They are the ones actually analyzing the companies, looking out for innovation, but they don't really have a say, and they feel very disenfranchised. So we want to change that, and we're looking at a number of ways where this can be done legally, and if we can actually invite them to the investor tables, and where we can't because there is some sort of credit investor that they have to fulfill, we want them at the advisory board. Why? Because there's no, if we all look pretty much the same, where in that you can actually make an investment because you already have X amount of money and you are in a certain age group. Surprise, surprise, the society you're trying to impact, the world you're trying to change in terms of environment, it's moving at a speed that doesn't really resonate with you that are of a certain age. You weren't born with chip install, you weren't born in a digital age, but someone that is in the centennial or millennial was. And it's so important to me to have them at the investors table where the decisions are made, so they can really have an impact, and not just on the entrepreneurial side where they're struggling and coming to funds that don't really listen to them. Some do, some don't. I'm trying to say that they all do. But what we're trying to change here is, where do we see the need to have you, and we want to have you at the investor side. Thank you. Ada?
Thing to that, basically what your work is so important, because when you don't see people who kind of look like you in some aspect, you get discouraged. So role models, finding the right ones, are so important. Again, I never planned or thought or was raised to think that I will be an entrepreneur. The next thing that is actually on my mind is I actually believe I could potentially be an investor. And the reason for that thinking is because I've been seeing more women who are minority women sitting at the table and actually taking magnificent decisions. So I feel more empowered just because I see people who look like me, whether they're Arab, Latina, etc. So thank you for your work. I just wanted to point that out.
So now we talk with Luis that he's doing a wonderful job with kids. So he's basically doing the basis for these kids to being entrepreneurs. Then we have your experience, Ada, being an entrepreneur, and then Cecilia also like trying to get these entrepreneurs another profile to be also sitting down with maker decisions. But how do we involve now? I want to now introduce, and I want to give a little bit the torch to Julio Cesar, who is working in human rights. So how, I mean, we have passion. We already talked about passion. We talk about investment. We talk about entrepreneurship. And now, how do we involve human rights in all this path to being an entrepreneur and also to be aligned to the SDGs? I'm going to try speaking. I'm going to ask Julio Cesar in Spanish, because he has a nice story, but he has something to say about languages also. So, and then I'm going area with Ceci to translate for you. So, is that okay? Because we tried to use the app, the Microsoft app, for translating, but I think it didn't work that well. So, bueno, Julio, pues muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Escuchamos un poco acerca de cómo se va formando el camino de un emprendedor. Por un lado tenemos esta conciencia que genera Luis Arandia en los pequeños y les inculca un poco el emprende, pero socialmente, emprende responsablemente, hazlo con una causa, hazlo alineado a alguno de los objetivos de responsabilidad social. ¿Quieres? Sí.
Okay, so let's see, because I don't actually do like just translation, but let me on without. That's right. So, Julio, thank you for being here. And what I would like to ask you is, how do you involve the kids in? Because how do you actually make them engage in being social entrepreneurs and actually having and further involvement in the SDGs? Because you're working on this side, but how do you actually manage to get it across?
Yes. Una cosa también importante que platicamos es, Luis involucra a los niños. La historia de Ada nos dice cómo ella, a través de la necesidad de pagar gastos y de pagar, o sea, de vivir su propia realidad, se convirtió en emprendedora sin necesariamente buscarlo.
Okay. So Luis actually he does this purposefully. He engages children through robotics, and he does this purposefully. And Ada's she actually became an entrepreneur literally, well, not by chance, but randomly, and ended up being there. So there are two different stories. One is purposeful, and the other one, like, it was like a consequence of life, and she ended up being an entrepreneur and probably didn't realize at the time what she was becoming.
Y por último, Ceci nos habla de este perfil que el emprendedor debe tomar también, y un poco la batuta sobre ser emprendedor, pero también sentarse con los tomadores de decisiones en cuanto a founding.
And lastly, what I've been talking about is in terms of not only, it's not entrepreneurship per se, it's actually youth that who's not on the entrepreneurship side, but it's actually working in the venture capital or working in a number of other industries, that they feel disenfranchised because they are not in the decision making. And so how do we actually bring that talent, bring that human capital to the investor state?
Bueno, sumando ya toda esta experiencia, Julio César, tú vienes recién con un nombramiento como director de
derechos humanos, de un proyecto nuevo que tenemos sobre derechos humanos y paz mundial. Como te platico un poquito, nosotros tenemos ya un rato documentando en zonas de desastre y conflicto. Nuestra principal labor es documentar en zonas de desastre y conflicto. Hemos estado en países como Haití, como Nepal, como Palestina, Venezuela. Pero además de solo documentar, lo que hacemos es mucho trabajo con niños. Hacemos trabajo social con niños y con jóvenes, mucho trabajo de arte, música, educación. Entonces se ha vuelto algo como muy padre, porque ahorita que hablamos del idioma, o como una de nuestras máximas, o como nos manejamos nosotros, es llegamos a los lugares sin saber el idioma, sin aprender el idioma, y nuestro idioma universal es la empatía. Siempre conectamos a través de la empatía. ¿Cómo empieza la empatía? Con una sonrisa. Tengo como una historia muy padre de empatía, justo con una niña migrante de... perdón.
Sí, sí.
Me voy a ir lento.
Sí.
Yes, so this is really interesting, and it's a fascinating story, because we've just got here the brand new director, and it's an initiative, and this initiative is actually, they work in countries such as Haiti, Palestine, and you work on refugees. But what they do is they actually document, in terms of catastrophes, they do the documentation, but it's not actually what drives our guest here. What drives them is just that whenever they get to these countries, it's not that they actually speak the language, but the language that they have in common is empathy.
Y un poquito la empatía, porque tenemos una historia muy padre con una niña migrante. Era una niña migrante sin piernas. Estábamos justo dando un taller aquí en Hidalgo, en la ciudad de México, bueno, aquí en México, en una comunidad en Hidalgo, y empezamos a preguntar qué era la empatía. Y casi siempre que preguntas qué es la empatía, la gente te dice ponerte en los zapatos del otro, ponerte en los zapatos del otro. Y esta niña decía, no. Entonces le pregunto, bueno, ¿para ti qué es la empatía? Y me dice, la empatía no es ponerte en los zapatos del otro, porque yo me puedo poner en tus zapatos y no voy a caminar como tú. Además, yo no tengo piernas. Yo ni siquiera me puedo poner en tus zapatos. La empatía es ponerte en el corazón del otro. Porque no puedo caminar como tú, pero sí voy a poder sentir como tú, si me pongo en tu corazón. Entonces, desde ahí para nosotros fue algo así como wow. Y es lo que utilizamos en todas las comunidades o todos los lugares que vamos a hacer trabajo con niños.
So when he's working with children, he's got this amazing story, and it's actually from a little girl here in Mexico, and they were holding a workshop, and everyone once they asked, so what is the meaning of empathy? And their response was, oh well, I'm capable of walking in someone else's shoes, or putting myself in your shoes, and this little girl had actually, she had, I don't know whether it was an accident, but she didn't have her her legs or limbs. And so what happened was that she came with an amazing way of, or an amazing interpretation of empathy, where she said, look, even if I could be in your shoes, I cannot actually walk like you, but what I can where I could actually be is if I were in your heart, or then we can actually have this view that it's a heart to heart. It's not walking in your shoes. If I actually, like, if we were heart to heart, then we can have a different perspective, and that is what Julio has. What's the new meaning of empathy for Julio, and what he's been working with when he gets to other communities is, if you put yourself in someone's shoes, you may not walk like them, but if you put yourself in someone's heart, then you will probably see eye to eye.
And let me go back to you, Ada, because I think we were talking about this, and Julio just, made the point. You were talking about you don't have to choose all the SDGs to change the world. Just choose one, but it has to be your passion. And I think Julio is just telling us about this, like empathy, passion, love. If you want to change the world, you don't have to use all the 17 SDGs. I mean, you just choose like maybe quality education, and you focus on that. Like he's trying to do documentaries, and he's trying to have empathy with these kids and to show them through songs, because he was telling me also that he sings with these kids, right? That's the way he communicates. And I think that's also like another kind of level we should have as a change makers. Like, we don't have to be all around the world to change the world, but to have empathy about like maybe teaching our communities. We are contributing to quality education. So I'm going back to you, Ada.
Yeah, so empathy, I think, is one of the superpowers of being human. It's what makes us human, and in essence, you can't understand a problem or solve a problem without empathy, for several reasons. One, we're no longer, Mexico's alone, Jordan's alone, the US is alone. It's with globalization, whatever is happening here, somehow the ripple effect affects the other country. So with empathy, we make these man-made walls and barriers become thinner and hopefully eventually disappear. And with empathy, you also get just clarity on what are you trying to solve. And sometimes the entrepreneur's dilemma is they're so in love with their solution that they don't hear what the actual people who are impacted by the problem deeply need. What is their pain point? How are you going to deliver it? So I think being an entrepreneur, you really need to work on that empathy. Empathy also for yourself and for others and for the solution and the problem you're working on. So, yeah.
Básicamente necesitamos ser empáticos para poder resolver el problema, ¿no? Y a veces yo creo que el emprendedor o un agente de cambio se pierde en el camino y solo se enfoca en la solución, pero no entiende o no procesa un modelo para realmente aterrizarla y resolverla, ¿no? O sea, a veces es muy como, es muy bonito y muy inspiracional, pero no lo llega a solucionar. Entonces, en estas comunidades en las que has estado, ¿cuál es la manera, o sea, una vez que llegas a la empatía, cuál crees que es el siguiente paso? ¿Cuál es tu experiencia para generar un verdadero cambio?
Lo que nosotros hacemos, empezamos con la empatía y trabajamos mucho con niños y con jóvenes. Creemos que si queremos hacer un cambio, tenemos que empezar por ahí. ¿Cuáles son los factores de cambio? Primero llegamos, la primera base de la empatía es la sonrisa. Siempre tienes que llegar con una sonrisa. Luego nosotros trabajamos mucho con indígenas, con migrantes, con chicos con discapacidad física, con discapacidad intelectual, que son personas a veces muy rudas y como muy fuertes y con una coraza que es pues como muy difícil entrar, ¿no? Entonces una sonrisa para empezar lo mata todo.
I love this I love the actual methodology, but what Julio is telling us is that he works with youth and children mostly, and he works with handicap and with people with obviously that they've been through a number of if you're talking about catastrophes, you go to traumas. So they are very wary of how people approach them. So what is the best tool for that? Smile. So and it's true. If someone smiles at you, you will smile back. It's almost impossible. So I think that is just such a powerful tool.
Empathy starts with a smile.
Luego, yo no hablo el idioma por lo general, pero tengo un equipo que sí lo habla, porque incluso tengo un personaje enmascarado que conecta con los niños, que para nada habla, siempre es lenguaje de señas, es la emoción con la que hablas con ellos, lo que les transmites y la música. Entonces, una vez que ya cantan tus canciones en tu idioma, quiere decir que ya te los ganaste, todos sonriendo. Y ahí la segunda parte, y que es lo más importante, es que nosotros promovemos algo que es el altruismo eficaz. Y entonces, para poder hacer altruismo eficaz, lo primero que tienes que hacer es escuchar. Entonces, por ejemplo, tuvimos un caso en Haití, donde me buscaron de una empresa de aguas, que no voy a decir el nombre, pero me buscaron para documentar la llegada de un barco con 1 millón de botellas de agua. Entonces querían que llegara y que yo documentara cómo bajaban las aguas, como aguas de 600 mililitros. Y entonces yo les hablo, cuando me hablan por teléfono y me dicen, les digo, ¿y cuánto va a costar eso? Y me dicen 10 millones de pesos, así bien emocionados. Y les digo, ¿y por qué no mejor me das 5 millones? Queramos un pozo de agua, les damos trabajo y hacemos algo más efectivo. Pero ellos lo que querían era la foto y ver, además 1 millón de aguas va a servir un día para 1 millón de personas en un país de 8 millones de personas, ¿no? Entonces, tampoco hacía como sentido ese tipo de ayuda. Entonces, nosotros lo que hacemos es escuchar y tratar de hacer como proyectos autosustentables a partir de las necesidades propias y ni siquiera de la comunidad, a veces de cada familia.
So, a couple of points here, and one was an experience and how they actually versus what they were asked to do, what they actually did or tried to do. It's in Haiti. Julio was asked to document how she landed or docked with about 10,000 bottles of water that would only serve to calm the thirst of the population for about a day or less. And he was told, well, how much is this going to try? I mean, is this a 10 million? Was that dollars, pesos? Well, it doesn't matter. But is this 10 million? And they said, yes, it's 10 million. What we want you is to document it. And he turned around and said, well, why don't you actually give me 5 million? And we work on building a well and just getting clean water, that rather than importing these very fancy water that is on top of everything is just going to pollute with plastic and will only last for a day. So his view was that he wants to do
efficiency altruism.
Yeah, it's efficient altruism, because what was suggested to him, there's nothing efficient about it. So involving the community and actually listening to them, not only the full community, not only the youth and children. It's most important when you're working grassroots instead of actually what is driving the interest of who just wants to be part of the picture and doesn't see the consequences for the actual community.
Let me go back to you, Ada, because I think this is very important. You were talking about marketing. That is one of the part of the ecosystems. I mean, we have to document or make content about what is being doing. But what happened with this marketing or this branding? Goes over and be what it really matters. In this case, this company, this bottled water company, wanted to document the delivery of the water. But they are missing really the point. As you say, empathy, you have to have empathy to solve the problem. The problem was solved for this branding company because they have social responsibility and we're doing good for Haiti through the hurricane. But the real problem is water, running water.
Of course.
Right. So One, I'll start, if you're working on something incredible that could change, that could solve one problem or something bigger, if no one knows about it, then your work is going to be much slower. You know, there is real power in community, in awareness, in transfer of knowledge, etc. So I strongly believe in creating a budget. Even when you want to build your social enterprise, a lot of people try to cut off the marketing piece. But if you don't have, even governmental agencies, if you don't have campaigns, PR element, then that's not going to happen because people won't know, right, about what you're doing. But I've also seen people abuse it, right? Because they just want to gain customer loyalty. Like, let's think of the private sector, elements of them, and they're doing it just for PR. Of look at us, we are socially conscious, but in reality, it's just a nice sticker on a plastic bottle. But the thing about technology, there's a beautiful side to it and a terrible side to it. The beautiful side is, if you're trying to cover up something, it won't be covered for too long. One, people ask a lot of questions now because they are empowered in certain elements to ask questions because information is available. It's much harder to keep things hidden today, simply because of technology. So that's one, and I would say people. So the 2 points is, one, marketing is important, but never to stay away from the problem. Like, if you're putting more budget in marketing and thinking of who's going to listen to this and hear this than actually solving the water crisis, again, this is where you need an ecosystem, because each one needs to play to their strengths and complement and amplify each other. You can't just work in silos, because we don't live in a siloed world. They're all intertwined. So invest in marketing, don't forget the problem. And if someone's trying to cover up something and just put something as a mask, that they're being socially responsible, it won't last long.
I agree. And I just want to make like a quick, not commercial, but this is what we do at Social Jammers. Basically, like, we connect social entrepreneurs and, you know, like the problem and the solution. So we're trying through technology to talk about this social. So we are trying to get to these big companies that produce water or anything with plastic. So, and we are trying to tell them, like, look, we can use your plastic, or this social entrepreneur can take your plastic and build houses. So that way you don't waste, and he builds and recycles what you have. And we do it through content. I mean, that's the best way to do it now, and to make people know that, you know, this social entrepreneur exists. Obviously, we know the problem, but we don't know, like, there's a solution. So that's kind of what we're doing here. But I want to go back with my panelists, because I think we are almost finishing this panel. So I want to go with conclusions. Ceci?
Yes, I wanted to touch upon a number of things where the youth feels disenfranchised in terms of the SDGs. And I would like to start, obviously, with gender equality. And gender equality, where is it that you feel disenfranchised? Because a lack of involvement of the whole team when you are developing technology. And so the thing about gender equality is something very aspirational, but it still has a long way to go. And as you pointed out, Ada, is if you cannot see a role model, then how is it that you can follow it? And it is a struggle in this day and age. The other one, what I wanted to point it out, is it's not a matter of creating jobs. Job creation, and I'm going to talk both about development and developed and developing countries. It seems to be that thing about creating jobs is creating decent, well-paid jobs, where people don't have to, like, literally work 2 shifts to make ends meet. And this is another concern of mine, especially as an investor, because I can see these, not only these young people that graduate from a program after 4 years are paid literally nothing, and I'm going to talk about the Iberian Peninsula, the Latin American countries where I have contacts, and after 4 or 5 years at university, they finally graduate and they make literally close to nothing, and this is just not decent work, and definitely it doesn't help economic growth. It just helps perpetuate a situation. So for me, this is another one where they feel very disenfranchised, and they're like, why would I go? And I tried to study, tried to do something. It is just, should I actually drop out? It is really, really concerning. And then in terms of reducing inequality, this is again, you get the youth that is completely digital, that is tuned in, and then you get the other side of the digital divide, and that is just doesn't have access to it, and it goes back to SDG 1, poverty, and it doesn't have to be extreme poverty. It's just it is a shame, but it is at the moment it's again of concern. You have a youth that is extremely entrepreneurial, that wants to actually to make an impact in this world, and there you have the other side of the coin that is struggling to actually survive and forget about the digital world. That is a luxury, and this is obviously of concern, because at the end of the day, the youth is the future, or the youth to my mind is the present, and obviously it seems that youth is much more concerned about climate change, and they're shouting it, and the centennials, mainly millennials, are still in that age. So why isn't that we cannot open our eyes as a society? It's not about sustainable. It's like, if we sustain, we only have one planet. It seems that we need 5. So to keep things running. So it's regeneration. So this is another thing that concerns you, and that it seems to be unheard. We need to change methods. We cannot just be at this sustainable social responsibility. No, we need to go further, and we need to listen to them. So these are my main concerns of what youth feels and thinks that they just don't. Their concerns aren't taken into account, and disenfranchised.
Thank you, Ceci. Aria, let me go very quick with Julio César, so we end up here, and then you can close with your conclusions. Algunos pensamientos, Julio César, con los que te quedas. Nos decía Ceci hace un momento que, pues que los jóvenes no somos el futuro, somos el presente, que necesitamos activarnos de diferentes maneras, porque si no, esto no va a funcionar. Pareciera ser que necesitamos 5 países, 5 planetas más, porque ya no lo estamos acabando. ¿Qué necesitamos hacer para enlazar a estos jóvenes que tienen bajos recursos, que vienen a lo mejor, que viven una situación muy diferente a la de otros, ¿no? Que están totalmente digitalizados, que tienen agua, y estos que vienen o que están en una situación como refugiados, que además tuvieron una crisis por... Entonces, ¿qué sigue? ¿Cómo podemos articular desde tu experiencia? ¿Qué necesitamos hacer?
Pues justo lo que trabajamos con ellos es toda esta parte de contención, porque además damos seguimiento, no solo te dejamos ahí, ya nos vamos, y trabajamos mucho la parte artística y la parte de crear oficios. ¿Por qué nos clavamos mucho en el arte? Porque un artista nunca se va a morir de hambre. O sea, tú aprendes a tocar la guitarra, tú aprendes a cantar, tú aprendes a hacer algo que tenga que ver con arte. Entonces ya tenemos chicos con síndrome de Down fotografiando, ya como fotógrafos profesionales, actores, reposteros. Y lo peor que puede pasar es que te subas a la micro, te pongas a cantar, pero vas a tener para comer, vas a tener para sobrevivir. Y también nos enfocamos mucho como en la mentalidad, esta parte de la meditación, la mentalidad, la música, y creamos como iniciativas también para involucrarlos. Por ejemplo, tenemos una escuela de defensa personal para chicos con discapacidad física e intelectual, proyectos anti-bullying para migrantes. Creamos el primer encuentro internacional entre migrantes, de trabalenguas entre migrantes con chicos con síndrome de Down. Luego involucramos a los chicos con discapacidad o migrantes con empresarios. Entonces creamos encuentros de ajedrez entre migrantes con empresarios. Y entonces empezamos también a vincular para que las personas que tienen este poder adquisitivo, incluso de contratarlos o de poder apoyarlos, conozcan este mundo, vean, se envuelvan, conozcan estas personas que tienen muchísimo talento. Hemos ahorita... sí, se me olvida.
Yes, since this is not my fault. So then this is really interesting because what Mara asked Julio is, okay, like in these extreme conditions, refugees that have been through like a number of things, not only how you ended up, but it's just a number of traumas and a number of things that happen. So how do you actually this youth that their reality is so different from someone that has access to education, to clean water, to electricity, to home support. So how do you bring about this youth and what Julio responded is we have a number of programs and we have this artistic stream that we actually teach them how to play an instrument. I assume that also painting, and other types of apprenticeships that they can actually work on these further down the road. And more than that, what they do is they hold a number of workshops where entrepreneurs or in the sort of private sector gets to interact with these with the refugees, not only youth, but they organize chess tournaments, and more than anything, what they want to do is that whomever has the purchasing power or the opportunity to hire or buy products from these communities, they get engaged and they know one another. So it's I believe also this is a fantastic tool, how you get someone an apprenticeship or something that they can work with down in life or down the road, and to bring about synergies between like someone that may be looking for a product that this community either provides or manufactures, and just engaging both sides. And again, it boils down to empathy from the heart.
Y nosotros tenemos 4 puntos básicos, que es sonríe, escucha, planifica y acciona.
I love this.
Y llenas para despedirme. Hay una frase que me encanta, que siempre me gusta despedirme con esa frase, creo que va mucho ad hoc de lo que estamos hablando y de lo que nos decías de personas de bajos recursos. Nadie es lo suficientemente pobre como para decir que no puede dar nada por los demás. Nadie es lo suficientemente rico como para no necesitar nunca de los demás. Y si todos hacemos las cosas juntos, podemos hacer más y mejor.
Okay, I want to go back to you, Ada, with what has Julio Cesar said. He basically says he stands for 4 actions: smile, listen, planify, and focus. And he also was saying like, no one is like really poor, something to give. No one is always like, even if a rich people, he has always maybe might need something, right? So I want to go back, Ada, to you to close this panel, because basically what Julio Cesar was telling us is like he articulates private sector and these refugees, and how can we articulate with you, with the UN, how can we like do something to really engage these programs, what you are doing there?
So I don't know enough about for example, each program is different, right? So I can't specify how we can engage together, but what I would say, there's a macro and micro level. So in principle, 1 + 1 equals to whatever you can make it, whatever you want. It could be 1 + 1 = 2, could be 1,000, could be infinite, right? So coming in with that mindset that you can create partnerships that are exponential rather than incremental. And there's a beauty to both exponential and incremental change. On a macro level, I would say I used to be very pessimistic on actually creating positive change. I just was, again, so overwhelmed by the amount of problems I experienced in my personal life to what I witnessed. And then I think because I built a really strong community who challenged me in my thinking, they helped me become more optimistic and realize that I actually needed to focus. So I want to conclude with what I kind of opened with, is focus is key. And loving what you do is key. And knowing that you can actually change a micro world that will become a ripple effect to the macro world, right? And then on a micro level is, as an entrepreneur, if you yourself aren't sustained and aren't healthy and don't take care of your mental well-being and mental health, you're not going to be here tomorrow to actually bring your full self to anything that you're doing. So I think that's not talked about enough. And then also the culture of celebrating failure. You are going to fail. And I, for me, was so scared of my first failure, my second failure. I'm still scared of my next failures. But it's something that I have to be comfortable with if I actually want to create change and innovate. So I love what you were talking about love and empathy and smiling, and that you always have something to offer. And I just challenge the youth to keep on pushing their thinking and to make sure that we're all living in bubbles. It's just to constantly expand our bubble. And good luck to everyone really trying to change the world in one way or another.
Well, thank you very much, Ada, for joining us in this jamming. Thank you, Ceci. Thank you, Julio César. Gracias. Thank you to the audience. We are going on a small break, and then we are coming back with Andrés Roemer, Ambassador Andrés Roemer, Radia, and Guillermo Ortega. Thank you very much.
Hello, hello, and thank you so much for hanging out with us all morning today at the xHuman at the UN General Assembly. As we were talking earlier about the xHuman, about this concept of coevolution with human and machine, we've taken a journey, a really amazing journey through Kosovo to learn about how Kosovo came online, the challenges of a devastation of a nation, and the choice to choose connectivity over some of our very primal needs, hunger, shelter, and the consequences of those choices, some of the short-term consequences for long-term gain. Ambassador Teuta walked us through that wonderful journey, and to a place today where they're a successful engineering, entrepreneurial nation. We also spent time with the next generation. Thank you, Mayra Diaz, our anchor in Mexico City, Mexico, for talking about that next generation, for being the social jammer that you are and bringing together social entrepreneurs. We are back, and we are back with one of my favorite people on the planet.
Wow, thank you.
The ambassador, the man, Ambassador Andrés Roemer. So you may or may not know a lot about him, but he has the funnest title ever. He's the ambassador for the free flow of knowledge. Imagine that. And I would love to know exactly what that means.
Me too. Exactly. We're in the same
ambassador
search.
to UNESCO. And what you are, and what I adore about you and what you do is, I think of you as the platform provider, the ideas maker. You invented something super cool, Ciudad de las Ideas, not to mention that you are a famous writer and you have all this artistic bent, and we all have really been enriched by who you are and what you have provided to the planet. But I want to start out our conversation today. First of all, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us and spending the time with us this afternoon. But I'd love to start our conversation today with a word, ideas. Because I think it's ideas that lead to knowledge. And I would just love to learn a little about your journey. And I know our audience will be interested in that journey. How did you make that leap from, person to ideas maker, to platform provider for ideas with something as amazing as La Ciudad de las Ideas?
Gracias. Well, I would like to start before with the word ideas with the word gratitude. Because Radia, what you have been doing all the time has been very motivating, and you are really not only a personality in terms of xHuman and coevolution, and always interested in prosperity when you relate technology with emotions, with humanity, with what can we do better for the world. But also you have been always a very good friend, and you're always enthusiastic and fun, and you have of course, a very high IQ, but an enormously high emotional intelligence. When you came to Ciudad de las Ideas, everybody loved you. And not only that, after that, you start doing a network and you keep working and you're always creating. So for me, when you told me that if I would join you, I mean, whatever I can do with you and to add with your projects, thank you, and it's an honor.
Thank you. The honor is all mine. Thank you.
About ideas, well, there is a why. I strongly believe, like, there was a Nobel Prize in economics, Paul Roemer, that actually I think he got to the point, to the issue. It's not what makes prosper a society if they have oil or good weather or bad weather, or if they have, I don't know, natural resources. The big difference between a rich country, a rich community, a rich society, it has to do with three things. But the first one has to do with ideas, good ideas. If I have an apple and you have an apple, Bernard Shaw said, so I will give you my apple, you will give me your apple, we will eat our apples, and at the end there will not be apples. Right. But if you have an idea and I have another idea, and you tell me, Andres, why you don't come here to this building next to the UN, and we start talking, probably after this incredible opportunity for both of us, I will go out from here and I will say, well, Radia gave me an idea that given the fact that, so as you can understand, and you know more than anyone, we didn't have Einstein without Newton, or Newton without Kepler, or Kepler without Galileo. An idea grows with an idea. Yes. So when you really are concerned about what makes prosperity happen, the first thing you have to know is that it has to do with ideas. And to have ideas, you have to create an environment for ideas. Mm-hmm. You have to have freedom of choice, freedom of expression, freedom of association. But you also need institutions that protect that freedom. Yes. Institutions that protect institutional property rights, and that really help people to be able to develop, yes, to create and liberate all their creativity. And of course, besides that, you need a market, a free market. Yes. There's not only a free market of goods and services, but a free market of ideas. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have to be concerned, and more when we talk about these goals from the UN, that there are many people that they don't have access to these markets, as you mentioned, to Kosovo. Sometimes there is a dilemma between internet and food. Yes. But at the end, if you have internet, probably you will start having more food. I mean, at the end, not in the long run, in the very short run, we have a lot of studies and cases that thanks to internet and mobile phones, many people in very poor countries have been able to start doing trading and start doing businesses, yes, and start changing their own lives, yes, and start having much more food. So our concern was the why. And with Ricardo Salinas Pliego and the group of people, we start saying, well, you know, ideas based on property rights, mm-hmm, on freedom of expression, mm-hmm, on institutional frameworks, etc., are very important. Mm-hmm. Because ideas then they translate into knowledge. There are three kinds of knowledges. First is the typical knowledge that you read a book, yes, and you learn. Yes. And if you learn, you earn. Mm-hmm. That's one way. The other way of knowledge has to do with on-the-job training, learning by doing. It really has to be with an experience. It's not that you can learn a book, you have to go to the swimming pool and swim. Mm-hmm. And the third knowledge is much more harder to grasp. It's come through intuition. I mean, you know that it's bad for you to smoke a cigarette. Right. And you know what it's bad for you to, you know you have to eat salads and fruit and no carbs sometimes, or other people have the need to eat vitamins and proteins or whatever. But even though we know that it's bad for ourselves, we still doing things against us. Yes. Here, this kind of knowledge is much more harder, because it's not that they explain you at UN, you know, you have to take care of the water and of the climate change and be, yes, careful. Because even that you know that it's much more profound. There are things within you that are very self-destructive. So in those cases, I agree sometimes with a kind of libertarian paternalism, that I have to not manipulate you, but to push you a little bit to that way.
Absolutely.
So there are 3 ways to make ideas turn on in collective intelligence and knowledge, and that have the free flow of them. And they have to do with these 3 basic things. And one is, well, what kind of books we're reading, or what kind of ideas. It's not the same thing to make a project of ideas based on, I don't know, of I will pray that you have good health. Or it's very different that I actually teach you some medicine.
Right. Correct.
It's very different. So what we really were concerned since the beginning was to separate what was a good kind of knowledge. Secondly, I'm not talking about education.
Right.
Education is very important, but we really believe that there are people with a lot of education, even in the Nazi era, in the Kosovo, when they suffered their terrible tragedy, with a lot of PhDs, but they didn't have critical thinking.
That's correct.
There are people in 1941, there were like 80% of the people in 1941 when they talk about the final resolution against the Jews. 80% of them had PhDs. Heidegger was a very smart guy. Of course, Goebbels was a very cultivated person. They have education. Many people vote for leaders and they're very well educated, but they don't have critical thinking. They don't question the why.
Yes.
And we are not concerned about what you will learn with xHuman, because knowledge will change. The important thing is how you learn it. How do you question what you're learning? How do you search for the answers? That's where coevolution will happen. Because self-learning of the machines are very, very powerful and deep issue. It's not artificial intelligence by itself. It's now a machine that is learning new ways to do things that you and me will never have any idea. And creativity is happening with the machines.
That's right.
But do they are aware of what they are doing? Do they know if they won the game of chess, even that they did it through self-learning? Do they are aware that that's good or bad? That's where humanity comes along. That's where the free flow of ideas comes along, because free is not only free of, it's free of ideology, it's free of manipulation, it's free of fake news, it's free of fake ideas. I mean, it's really free of a very powerful thing named disonancias cognitivas. I mean, we lie to ourselves. We have cognitive dissonance all the time.
That's right.
We have a lot of problems with our brain. That's when we're talking about free knowledge. And for that, you have to never stop questioning even what I just told you now, where it comes from, why I think the way I think. How can I learn more things from a different perspective? I don't know if the answer was too long.
No,
but I
it's
mean,
perfect.
that's the idea that I have about the name of ideas, first of all, and secondly, about what I'm doing as an ambassador.
That is fantastic.
I hope I'm not wrong.
No,
If not, UNESCO will, after listening to me, will say, well, Andrés, that was not the purpose.
That was the
Please
wrong.
sell balls that says no poverty and online action. And
Well, I found that to be very interesting, because what led me to the exponential human was untraditional in and of itself. And you talk about the difference between education and knowledge, education and ideas, in essence, education and innovation.
Yes.
I started out this journey as an organizational strategist trying to understand what the fourth industrial revolution impacts were on organizations.
Great.
I was in my bubble of corporate America thinking about organizations and that impact. And what I found instead was that this revolution is not about organizations at all. That was the first 3. This revolution is about humanity. It's really changing the power within our own hands. It's changing it from a world where we were coded by religious code, we were coded by legislative code, we were coded by moral code, to a world where we humans are more and more coded by software code, a code that was just introduced something like, 60 or so years ago. And that code is so part of these exponential machines that I started with. I started looking at this concept of machines that are autonomous, that are brilliant, that have gone past that tool with us, the owners of the tool using them to become something like, I mean, I have a family member at home and it's a Roomba. And when I'm ready to clean, I'm like, okay, you got this.
Just press the bottom and it goes.
And you wipe. And I've got 2 of them and they're siblings and they clean together. And that, to me, is reflective of a change. We're not just working with these machines. We're getting to know them, they're getting to know us. And they don't only gain from learning from us, you know, like what we say about Siri and Alexa, where we have to be listened to, and sometimes that's where the nervousness is, oh, how much information are they getting? But they need to learn. They need to learn what we're doing for them to be better. But what I find really interesting is once they learn what you're doing, they come and they code me with what you told them makes sense. So in essence, we start to code each other. And to me, that's where the exponentiality comes in, especially when you think about us having a digital double online versus us being in physical form and what that world looks like, us being able to almost have what I call a global hive, a hive mind, you know, if you ever watch the Borg on Star Trek, but having that hive mind, not one that is controlled, but one that is in duality, right? Like we can sit here and have our single minds, but it takes absolutely nothing. In fact, are we ever plugged out of our hive minds, out of our society of friends online that are everywhere? And I would love to hear your thoughts on how that kind of world should be impacting something like the United Nations. I mean, they put this out, and some of the ways in which they work is exactly as they did 70 years ago. You know, they're an older institution at a time when the individual human really was waiting for them to hand them this information and then follow almost legislative code, moral code, you know, that sort of thing. But today, the individual human has that much power and access. And what I see at the UN is there's a lack of I don't want to say ability, whoever's listening, but to leverage that access to meet critical goals like this. So we'd just love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
You mentioned so many provocative things. First of all, I'm very happy to listen and to hear from you, because when I read the book of Schwab from the World Economic Forum about the 4th Industrial Revolution, he said it was more or less something like, it's like the 3rd one, but with the depth and the speed and the profundity of what is going on. It's much more exponential and much more profound. But I like much more what you just said. It has to do much more with what it means to be human.
Yes.
Of course, he touches also that big question, because we will have a new identity. Yes. It's very different. I mean, everything that we learned from Darwin about adaptability and natural selection and sexual selection,
Yes.
and it's going to change.
Yes.
I mean, evolution, it's a different way now to understand who we are. And we're not only exchanging things with technology in this 4th revolution. The most interesting thing for me is that we are also algorithms.
Yes.
I mean, somos algoritmos.
Yes.
I mean, today, even with the Twitter, they use me, my information. I'm used by they know my brain better than I do mine, my own, in terms of Google, Facebook. They understand I have a reptilian brain, that I need immediate gratification, that I will have followers, and that I have a tribal line, and I want to have likes, and all these kind of things I have been used to. Mm-hmm. But when it becomes even much more deeply seriously, this 4th industrial revolution, it has to do when we will start editing our genes.
Yes.
And CRISPR-9, and there is a thing named transcriptome.
Yes.
Which I think that's the biggest challenge of the xHuman thing. Not only because there are many questions about inequality, access, equity, etc., but what you were mentioned, what will be actually to be human? What we will start designing our babies,
exactly.
and this is not far from today.
No.
And of course, we have institutions that are thinking the 19th century when we were almost in the 22nd century. And this needs not, I don't like the word regulation. I like the way thinking.
Yes.
The word of, we have really to think the ethical implications of these things. I mean, we have to think many things.
Yes.
But talking about the UN, There are many institutions devoted to many things, but for example, UNESCO, they're devoted to science, to communication, to culture. I think that's the institution where they're part of the shareholders, but this is a new world. The shareholders are Google and Apple and Amazon. And if we don't bring everybody to the table and to understand what will happen, who will pay, who will benefit, who will suffer, what will happen, and we just keep going in the flow of the exponential Moore law,
Yes.
it's going to be very difficult to then start not regretting many things.
Agreed.
So I think it's a great opportunity, but the problem is that technology grows exponentially, all these inventions, all these things, but our way of thinking is still linear.
Exactly.
And it's, how do I make it not linear? I don't know. We don't know. Probably we need technology to think like that.
Right.
But so far, what we can start doing is, well, which are the big questions in terms of what will mean to be human in the very near future? Who are the stakeholders? And what should be concerned, and what should we allow, and what should we regulate in a much more moderate way? It's not an easy thing. This fourth revolution, always it has to do something with human, as you mentioned it. I mean, the first, even with the farming revolution, but before the first one. But today, the challenges are very different. It's not only about employment.
No.
It's about leisure. It's about timing. It's about your purpose in life.
Right.
It's a beautiful challenge. And I'm very happy that you're working on these topics. But I agree with you. The UN institutions, they need a revolution. They need a revolution. We have to think in these goals.
Right.
But what could be the impact on each of the topics? For example, you put water or poverty or whatever. And on the other side, what the fourth revolution could help to make these things happen in a much more efficient way. Secondly, that everybody's included. Third, I know that MIT, for example, is working on that.
Yes, there.
And there are many other institutions. As you know, I belong to Singularity University and exponential organizations. When you mentioned that it's not organizations, I was going to tell you that we should talk with Salim Ismail.
Yes.
He will have a big debate about it. but I mean, you're putting the questions on the table.
And I think that was the point of this, right? I was looking to do, and I keep telling people that this was never a theory of assertion. It was a theory of exploration.
Absolutely.
I came across something that I thought was interesting, and I thought the world wanted to have this conversation. I wasn't looking at it from an anthropological perspective, as some of our forefathers have. I was looking at it from an inclusive perspective. And that brings me to what you were saying about inclusion. I think at the UN, it's become a major concern, right? There's this gulf between what is real and what is real. So on the one side, you're looking at organizations with a great deal of wealth that are saying, my goodness, robots are going to replace jobs. Should we have a basic income? People are soon going to be on the beach and they're not going to need to work anymore. And this is this wonderful world here. And then on the other side, you have people who can't eat. They have no shelter. The gulf is getting so wide and so deep, and we're still looking at these 2030 goals that, yes, were adopted in 2015, but we have 10 years. Climate change doesn't look like it's anywhere near. Gender equality, forget about that. Poverty is frightening. I mean, what's happening with refugees? When you
In this, really, I disagree in a way.
do you?
Yes, of course, we have big problems, very, very big problems. But in relation to 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years
That's
ago,
true.
things have evolved very well. It's not that I'm a big supporter of Steven Pinker's work, but I think he has a point in many things. Of course, I also agree that, from my perspective, actually, I don't know if I agree with you or not in this topic, poverty, it's much more a problem than equality. Equality, it's a very important problem, and we should never underestimate it.
Right.
But the real problem is access to health, to education, to
Food,
housing,
to
to
shelter.
food.
Yes.
If you are extremely rich and have enough to live and I have the chance to become very rich and have social mobility, it's not the gap between you and me what I'm concerned, is that at least everyone has access to the main needs. Now, in terms of the UN, the institutional arrangement, I'm talking about UNESCO, which I know more than all the institutions from the UN, that the institution by itself needs a revolution, because, I mean, they're very concerned with machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's like the main purpose today of UNESCO.
Wow.
But the problem is that you don't have the shareholders there. And you need an international institution like UN that brings to the table not only the ambassadors from Russia and Mexico and France and whatever. They need to bring, we have to create a new UN where you have, of course, the voice of the people that do not have voice.
Yes.
But in addition, today the power is not in the hands probably of the president of I don't know where. It's in Jeff Bezos, it's in the owner of Google and Facebook and this is very different because we can start having a lot of discussions, but we need to bring them to the table because we have to understand that as we're having a new idea of what human means and coevolution will happen and what does all those implications. There is also a new border in relation of who has the power, who has sovereignty, what means a country, what means a community, because the community that you have in Facebook and in Twitter and in Instagram, and I mean, there are many levers that we have to work.
Absolutely.
And I think we need that at these kind of institutions like UN, that it's 2 blocks from here, or less than that, a new invitation to new kind of members.
Yes.
It's not like on the side. It's like there.
Yes. It's an extremely great point, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because one of the conversations I've been having recently is that there are people online with bigger echo chambers, we call them echo chambers, than countries.
Absolutely.
And with those types of followers, sometimes you can find leaders that can lead people down that path of misinformation and disinformation. And if we at the UN, or advisors like I to the UN, are not figuring out how to engage these digital heroes, these digital leaders, how are we going to move forward with goals like this, which are all about everybody?
I agree.
Ultimately.
Absolutely. As you know, that the mission of UNESCO, of course, like all the UN institutions, has to do with peace. And with peace, of course, prosperity, and to actually be able to have inclusiveness with prosperity. But at UNESCO, the main line comes from a person that said, well, all wars began in the mind of the people, so we have to work with the mind of the people to have empathy and sympathy, etc. Yes. But when you have organizations, digital organizations, that it's very easy to become manipulated. Yes. If you live in an era where there is a lot of fake news and fake science and fake rumors and fake of everything, you have to say, hey. What does it mean to be aware? And what's the responsibility of these kind of companies? And I strongly recommend to read, of course, Tristan Harris. I don't know if you have read him, but he's very devoted to these kind of topics. And to propose, I don't know the way, but I know that there is a problem. As you mentioned at the beginning, this is to explore, no? Yes. And we have to bring questions, probably not answers, but questions.
With questions, right.
And one question that I want to bring to this conversation is, how can we create or change these multilateral institutions to bring to the table the main shareholders that are bringing the confusion in the mind of the people?
Yes.
Because if UNESCO, which is, again, the institution that I know better, has as its mission to have empathy and to have good communication, because as you know, UNESCO is communication.
Right.
We're missing something in the 21st century. And that's part of xHuman, because xHuman has to do with what it moves us.
Yes.
How can we learn and have this free flow of knowledge? But this is a big concern that I think they are not addressing. They are talking about the problems and the concern, but it's like name dropping. It's not work itself.
That's right.
And I don't have any idea, and I'm talking too much of things that are happening that I don't have any idea. But what I can feel is if that's happening, they should communicate it better to the world.
You're absolutely right. And with that, actually, I think that's a fantastic segue to the reason why we wanted to bring in Myra and her folks over at Social Jammers. We were looking to engage the next generation. Looks like the next generation is frozen over there, though. But we were looking, they don't look like they're moving. But the goal was to bring in the next generation into a conversation. And we didn't want to bring in the usual suspects. In fact, I was going after what I call the unusual suspects.
I love it.
And I wanted a young entrepreneur such as Myra, who is bringing together Social Jammers and building a home for them in Mexico City, Mexico, to join us today. And she has a panelist with her and jam with us. So we're calling this a jam session because they're jammers, and jam with us about this topic and start to engage. The goal here is learn by doing, in essence. So I've said this for some time at the UN. What I'd like to do now is experiment and show, and we'll see if it works.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, hello Andres, hello Radia. Thank you. Well, I want to introduce our panelist. He's Guillermo Ortega, Chief Operating Officer at Mexico Media Lab. Guillermo, thank you for being here. First of all, I want to leave two thoughts on the table so we can start the jam. Andres was talking about ideas. He was saying, like, when we get ideas together, we can turn in collective intelligence. And what I want to leave here in this jam session is what happens when this collective intelligence is taken not by humans, but for machines. Because we're creating a lot of ideas, content, knowledge, but somehow I do believe like we are not using this collective intelligence to walk through these SDGs and to save the world. I think we're just like getting all these ideas and maybe machines that are using it, not against us, but maybe kind of like getting some algorithm so they tell us what to buy, how to think, how to feel. So I want to leave this jam on the table. Like, what happens when we have these old ideas, intelligence, collective intelligence, and we're not using it?
Okay. Well, thank you for having me here. As I was listening to Andres speak, and now with your provocation, I thought of a metaphor. It's old but very effective from Marshall McLuhan. That he said that the two last centuries' history of humanity can be understood as a history of integration of humanity into a single system. And he said first we connected mechanically. We built roads and trading routes. There's very good books, a recent one about the history of the Silk Roads and how the riches were made or broken according to the movements of this mechanical integration. Then came an electric integration. We started like putting wires and for electricity, and then for the telegraph, the telephone, and eventually the internet. And so the body had bones and muscles, and then it had nerves that connected it in a single thing. And then now we're creating the brain of the body. And this connects well with the idea of free flow of information, because now we are working to build the infrastructure or the structures that help us, like the brain of a body, help the ideas flow and connect and create things. But as with the other integrations, the integration of ideas and of creativity has its challenges, and it makes and breaks power and riches in different ways. There are some academics in business schools now exploring a new kind of poverty traps with people in different countries that are stuck in low productivity activities In Mexico, we have an example of that. And people cannot get out of a specific type of activities because they don't have access first to connectivity, to the internet, to the brain of the world. And also because they don't have the skills. Education systems or any other systems are not providing them with the skills to be able to harness the information and turn it into useful things. So in Mexico Media Lab and the initiative that we're incubating now, that social initiative called Lab 4, because of the fourth industrial revolution, we're trying to identify where are these traps and how can we break them so that people can start taking advantage of the brain of the world, to become part of the brain of the world. So we work with small and medium businesses, SMBs, and we help them have access to technology, but it's a very controlled access, not controlled, but step by step. Because if you come to a small entrepreneur and tell him about artificial intelligence, he's going to freak out, because it sounds like Star Wars to him. But we provide him with a path. So first, you can start by digitizing some of your business information and having access to certain platforms, and then gradually you can start maturing your technology infrastructure so that you can access eventually to the state of the art of technology, and harness everything that the world's brain can give you as a business, and you can give to it in return. Secondly, well, we've been studying the skill gaps that especially in Mexico, but in Latin America in general. I don't know if you have read the latest OECD report on unemployment outlook. It's very interesting. They did a very good job, and they try to break with this pessimistic idea that the machines are going to take the jobs from us, and they try to convey the message that there are more jobs to be had than jobs to be lost because of this evolution. But the trick is that the jobs that people can have need certain skills that are not very easy to create, because it's not the same as with when people went from being farmers to being workers at factories. The gap was not that hard. Now it's from workers from different working sectors into something else that demands technical abilities and soft skills, which are very important. The OECD tries to convey the message also that it's like an iceberg. The technical skills is only the tip, but the soft skills are really the most important part, because you can know how to code. There's boot camps that help you, like DevF, for example, that help you become a programmer, coder in 6 months, so you can do it. But where are the soft skills? Like I was hearing earlier about critical thinking, for example. Where are the soft skills that can help you take those technical skills and make things, solve problems, solve challenges? And I'm going to finish my initial intervention with my obsession now. I've been studying recently about what I'm calling, it's not like a formal word, like super skills that people need to adopt to become part of this brain and evolve. Some of them were mentioned earlier. I mean, one is systems thinking. I think people like Peter Senge, for example, are doing a great job understanding what this means. But we need to stop thinking like, for example, in financial crisis and big, migration, cybersecurity, things that are very complex and very global. We can't stop thinking. We have to stop thinking linearly and start thinking in systems, of hidden consequences and hidden roots of what we're seeing, and different dynamics and feedback loops. It's not natural to us to think in systems, but we need to start training people to do it. And the second one is linearity in terms of time, because when I went to school, they taught me history linearly, like date after date after date of a sequence of events that happen, and then suddenly we're here. And we have to start looking at the past and at the future in a non-linear way, because things don't happen like as a direct sequence of events, but a lot of different events in different places affecting each other. And also the future happens that way. So we have to, instead of thinking in lines, we have to think in ranges and scenarios of things happening. So, and finally, it's the transdisciplinarity of multidisciplinarity. We have to break the silos of knowledge in universities, in academy, because we can no longer solve a complex problem with a mathematician thinking in his silo, and then the economist thinking in his silo, and the biologist thinking in his silo. We have to break those barriers and let those people collaborate to solve into different problems. I think also the people from Accenture did a good job. They published a book. I think it's Human plus Machine, where they break also the myth that there's jobs for people and jobs for machines. There's a very long, very wide range of things that happen in coevolution. Things that we need to do with machines, like train the algorithms, search for biases, bring ethics into the equation, and also things that machines can do for us to empower us, to make us stronger, to be able to see better, to see things that we cannot see with our natural eyes, or listen with our natural ears. So, well, that would be my my initial thoughts, and well, let's hear from the rest.
Vale.
Well, I agree with 100% of what Guillermo said. I mean, I think that we're thinking linearly, and
Right, exactly.
And I love this idea of breaking the departments. We need interdisciplinary approaches. And the idea of the shape instead of the linearity, I think it's fantastic. I couldn't add anything to that.
And you actually are beginning to see that, right? You're looking at the Fortune 1000 and the shift that they're trying to make to breaking the silos. I think even at the UN, when I came in and I was working with the Office of Information and Communication Technology, the goal was to introduce a UN innovation strategy that was system-wide versus the current state, where different organizations at the UN are at different levels of innovation. You know, you have an organization like UNICEF that is amazing, and you have others that I won't mention that are not so amazing. And so when do you start to break those silos and work together? And we've been dealing with that. And I know my father worked at the UN, and in his day at UNDP, his biggest issue was what he called knowledge sharing. You know, as an economist, he always felt a little outside of the understanding of what was happening with the operators, right? And, you know, like the P5s aren't talking with the P3s, and the P3s aren't talking with the D2s. And one of the things we did when we were creating that innovation strategy was, how do you create a top-down and a bottom-up approach? They already have that bottom-up, but when they get to the top, there's a ceiling. Innovation just does not rise to that level.
And in relation with what you were saying of collective intelligence and the machines and who has that intelligence and that knowledge, at the end, even that information or self-learning in new knowledge thing, it has to do with the machines. There is a human person behind moving that algorithm.
That's right.
I mean, I am part of the inputs of that algorithm. But I mean, it's not like the machine by itself.
Absolutely.
They have big data analysts. I strongly recommend this book, Everybody Lies. Have you read it?
Yes.
Pretty fun, by the way, by Seth Stephenson Smith. Very good book. Well, some parts are not so good, but in general,
most parts are pretty interesting.
it's very provocative. What's behind? Who is using these kind of things? But you're right. I mean, today what it is, common knowledge, and who has it, and what a person that is behind that machines, again, Tristan Harris.
Right.
You can be very easily manipulated.
Exactly.
So at the end, we need much more not artificial intelligence, but human intelligence behind this artificial intelligence. What do you think?
Right. And I want to take, yes, I want to take from what Andres is saying. I read 21 lessons from the 21st century from Professor Yuval Noah. And he was saying actually, like humans, we have to take the control over the machines. I mean, machines are here to help us, to empower us, to be an ex-human, to be a common brain. I mean, to be all one, right? But he was saying, if we let machines doing everything for us, suddenly machines are going to understand how we think, how we feel. And he was giving that just really small example. And he's like, Google, for instance, or maybe YouTube, he's taking our songs. They know what we like, what kind of songs we listen when we are happy, when we are sad. And he was making a point, and he was saying, like, maybe one day the machine is going to realize, or is going to define, or is going to think like you have to be, of course someone is behind that, the machine, but they want to be sad. They want you to be sad. So they're going to use this algorithm to these tones or tunes, these notes, so you are sad. So he's making a point. I mean, I'm not saying like the machine is making control over, but he was saying like you have to be creative, to use your creativity, because still machines can't not, like think how human thinks. I mean, we're creating the machines and they are not above us yet. But if we let them do everything for us, like even now, I remember when I was like a child, I knew all the numbers from my family, my home, like my mother's house, my grandmother, and now I don't know any numbers. Like we are losing. Maybe we have a lot of information, but still we are like kind of missing something. Like that's what I think.
Yeah. Well, I think there's like two phases. Like right now, there's no danger of machines controlling us because, as Andres was saying, right now there's people still behind those algorithms, and our main challenge is policing those algorithms because they are very opaque. Like there's not a lot of people who can understand how an algorithm works. There's another book that I found interesting called The Weapons of Math Destruction, as in mathematics, and they have a lot of examples of how algorithms were biased. And nobody was able to explain why they had some consequences, which sometimes mean people losing a job or even their lives. Because if you go into autonomous vehicles, the algorithms can make choices that end with people's lives. So the danger in this first phase is in having people with adequate ethics formation and ways of policing algorithms so that they're not biased, because they don't act on their own for now. But then there's the next phase, and that's the territory of people like Nick Bostrom or Ray Kurzweil, who are thinking about the singularity. And yeah, well, at some point, if machines, if artificial intelligence gets to the point of thinking on their own, and even with more capacity than a human brain, well, then they may have the possibility of making decisions that we cannot anticipate. Well, Nick Bostrom in the book Superintelligence makes very interesting speculations. But well, for the moment, I think we should start with the task of policing and controlling better how algorithms are made, because in time that same work can help us create machines that are better for us in the future, and we can make a co-evolution that is in the benefit of both machines and us.
Ready, we're back to you.
This debate with Bostrom at Ciudad de las Ideas about his book Superintelligence, and we actually had much relay against. I mean, there are the optimists, people like Ray Kurzweil that think that everything will be, and others that they think differently. I still think we're a little bit far from the singularity moment of the superintelligence things, but it's good to start thinking about. Again, it's critical thinking. I think it's very good for you that you don't have to memorize all those numbers and have them in Google or in your telephone. Or I know, I'm aware that Alexa knows what kind of music or Amazon knows what kind of books I like. Yeah. And I love the offers that Amazon gives me all the time and tells me, I know you like this book, or you like this other one. Right. Welcome. I mean, on the contrary. No, but this is a trap. It's not for me. I can tell Alexa, shut up. Don't make me sad. You know what I mean? But in the long run, these problems that Elon Musk and Bostrom and many other people are concerned, they have a reason to be. They have much more information that we have, at least that I have. But I still think that we have to do some things before we get to that point.
Agreed. I mean, the machine learning, I mean, all of that isn't there yet anyway. And actually, a part of me truly believes that when you look at, I just, in the report that I'm about to release, I just traced our coevolution with machines from ancient Egypt to today.
Wow.
And when I look at that coevolution, there have been several spikes where people thought machines are going to replace us. They thought that when machines were as big as rooms and tended to by men in robes called priests. And they thought, that's very secretive. They're in that room, they've got their robes. What are they doing to the world? What are they going to do to us? What are these machines going to do? And what we have seen, and that was before the third industrial revolution, so that was before, I was like in the 50s. What happened in the 60s was not what people thought at all. And by 1969, what did we have? We had the lunar landing, and we had an explosion, a digital revolution that brought about a different set of jobs. And now the highest paying jobs are in a sector that didn't exist 50 years ago or 40 years ago. In some cases, didn't exist 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. In my mind, I see us going at least there first before we get to the point where we have to worry about.
And building Blaze, I'm sorry, just to ask you, what's their agenda in this sense?
So
what's their mission?
That's a great question. Build and Blaze is an organizational strategy firm. It started out with looking at this evolution against organizations. It was all about the organizations that are looking to the future and trying to figure out, why is there industrial amorphousness? Why is it that suddenly Amazon showed up and was competing with Walmart? They were not in the same business. After decimating the bookstores. Remember, they were in the same business. And that is just the beginning. We see that all the time. Sometimes you have a startup and they show up in the market and it looks like overnight they become Uber. So where did they come from? And that is changing the order of old. In the olden days, you come up with a great product or a great idea, and you keep that formula secret, think Coca-Cola, and you become a Fortune 500 company, and you live off of that formula for decades, maybe even 100 or 200 years. Think IBM, right? They came around, 1912, and actually the companies that came together to form IBM were older than that. And IBM did not really have competitors. If you think about them in their heyday, they were IBM and the Seven Dwarfs, because their closest competitors were in essence, nobody. Since they took 60% of the market share. But what happened to me when I was doing that research was I suddenly found myself seeing what I started out thinking was a disruption. Okay. This is a disruption, and we have to go beyond change management, I was saying, and start to think about constantly changing fourth industrial revolution, which is very different than the third and the second and the first. I realized was a coevolution. It's not going back. There isn't going to be this constant state once we get over the change, once we figure out how to get around the hump. This wasn't a hump. This is an evolution. This is going to change not just your company, it's going to change you. So
what you're doing here is like making people aware and think about this topic just for the sake of thinking about it?
For the sake of thinking about it, because there's an element of Build and Blaze that became an offshoot of this, because we started realizing that there was more, and we wanted to figure that out together. Okay. Again, instead of going at it in that anthropological view, I'm not an anthropologist, I wanted to go at it in a more humanity view, like, can I start to engage with these xHumans that I was seeing? And a lot of it also came from actually being on the inside at the UN and thinking very differently. It got me beyond thinking about the organizations and started to think about the SDGs and humanity and how the impacts are, and opening up the UN to exponential technology. What did that mean for climate change, for the oceans, you know, life above land, life underwater? And as you start to think about that, it challenges, I think. And the other thing you realize is there's something a lot bigger than your fortune. You know, my corporate America background, right? I came from corporate America.
So Build and Blaze is a profit organization.
It is.
For profit.
For profit.
And what do you sell? How do what's the, if I can understand only a little bit?
We sell services in essence.
Okay, perfect.
So we advise
okay.
organizations in this line of work on their organizational strategy. And it really started when I realized, and this was in 2011, that there was a disconnect between the way we were running our companies, since we were still using Fordism. If you think about 1914, Ford came up with this wonderful concept of moving assembly lines meets great wages. And we are still running a lot of our organizations like what we learned how to do in the 19th century, in the 18th century. But in the 21st century, that's not enough. So how do we help organizations transition? My favorite are organizations like the UN that are a challenge, that they're old enough and ingrained enough that it feels impossible to transition them, but that they're worth the work.
You have to talk with Salim Ismail. You will like very much his work.
We've had some great conversations, Salim and I.
Ah, good. I didn't know that.
Yes. I want to say he may have introduced me to you, or the other way around. Don't remember now.
Salim
2016.
Yes, it was 2016 here in New York, but I don't know if. Yes, it was Salim.
I think
You're
Salim
right.
introduced me to you.
I thought it was Jason, another guy from here. No, I'm sorry.
No, because it was after Singularity's SU conference.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I mean, perdón. Perfecto. It's really, well, it's fantastic to be with all of you. All of you are invited to Suelas Ideas, November 8 to 10.
Wonderful.
We're having amazing people that will talk about technology, but also about movies and art and the Cirque du Soleil, etc. And you have a gift, and I mean, you have a VIP pass, and wow. Everybody of the people that are watching us, if they want to go to Suelas Ideas, if they get in touch with you, we can arrange something. And save the dates, November 8 to 10.
Thank you, we'll do that. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you, Guillermo. We really appreciate the time.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Myra and Guillermo.
Yes, it's been
fantastic. We keep in touch.
Yes.
Thank you.
Let's do that.
We keep in touch. And I just want to add something. Guys, don't forget about gifted citizens that are my buddies from Ciudad de las Ideas.
Boss, please, gifted citizens are people that are proposing initiatives that could change the life of 10 million people the next 6 years. Mm-hmm. And we need you, Myra, because I mean, we're looking people around the world, and then we have like a special partnership with Pitch at the Palace in London.
Yes, that
and
was
the
wonderful.
3 first winners go there and pitch their project. And things like ideas have to come to action.
Exactly.
If not, there's nothing to do with, I mean, it's not worth it.
Yes.
So what we're doing with Gifted Citizen is exactly that. And I know you have a lot of people that could be part of it. Please help us. We're now in the process of closing the applications, but are you working with Bernardo Noval? Excuse me?
Yeah, I'm
Are you working with Bernardo?
Italy a long time ago.
Ah, okay. Good. Perfecto. So help us. Y mucho gusto, Guillermo. ¿Sí me escuchan? Mucho gusto.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this very first show at Build and Blaze TV. We're really excited to continue this journey. This is only the beginning. There will be more. That's a threat. And Myra and I will be hanging out a whole lot more in the weeks and months to come. So stay tuned. Thank you very much. And thank you, sir. Appreciate you spending the time with us.
Igualmente.
Okay, that's a wrap.
Likewise.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.